I'm a nurse. I work night shifts, and I've seen enough to know when something doesn't belong, even if it looks harmless. Hospitals train you to trust patterns, to read bodies, to react fast, but nothing prepares you for something that follows its own rules and never explains itself. The first time I heard about the cat, I thought it was just another story people pass around to deal with stress because night shifts are long and people need something to talk about that isn't death. They said the cat appears without warning, sits at the end of a patient's bed and waits. No noise, no movement, no reaction, just waiting. And after that, things don't last long. I saw it for the first time during a quiet shift when nothing unusual was happening, and I had no reason to expect anything out of place. The patient in that room was stable, recovering, and there were no signs that anything would go wrong that night. When I entered, the cat was already there, sitting at the end of the bed like it had chosen that exact spot for a reason. It didn't react to me, didn't move at all. I checked the patient carefully, going through everything step by step, and nothing looked off. The monitors were fine, breathing was normal, and if I'd walked in without seeing the cat, I would have left without thinking twice. I stayed longer than I should have, watching both of them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And when I finally left the room, I told myself it didn't mean anything. 2 hours later, that patient was gone. After that, I started paying more attention. I watched the rooms more closely, and every time I saw that shape at the end of a bed, I stopped. One night, I saw it again in a room with a patient who wasn't critical. I stood outside the door longer than I should have, staring through the glass and trying to convince myself I was overreacting. When I entered, the air in the room felt normal. The machines sounded the same, but the cat was there, sitting in the same position as before, completely still, like it was waiting for something to finish. I walked closer, forcing myself to act like this was just another check. I reached the bed and looked at the patient, and everything seemed fine, but my attention kept going back to the cat because it didn't behave like something that had wandered in by accident. Again, it didn't move and didn't even blink. I moved my hand toward it, not fully sure why I was doing it, but needing to break that stillness, and at that moment, the patient's breathing changed in a way that made me react immediately. I called for help immediately. Staff rushed in, and the room filled with movement and instructions, and I stepped back to give them space, but I kept looking at the end of the bed. The cat was gone, and nobody noticed when it left. The patient didn't survive, and it was impossible to ignore what I'd seen. The nights after that felt different, and I started avoiding rooms when I saw the cat inside, because I didn't know how to stand there and watch it again without reacting. Other nurses knew about it, but nobody said much, and there was an understanding that some things don't get reported because there's nothing to report. You can't write that in a chart, and you can't explain it in a way that makes sense. I kept working, but I changed how I moved through the hospital, and every time I passed a room, I checked. Not for the patient, but for that shape at the end of the bed. Months passed, and I learned to live with that tension, even though it never really left. Then my mother got sick, and everything changed in a way I wasn't ready for. She was admitted to a different hospital, and I visited her after my shifts, trying to keep things normal between us even though we both knew her condition wasn't improving. We talked about small things and avoided anything that made it real. One night, after a long shift, I almost didn't go, but something pushed me to visit anyway, even though I couldn't explain why it felt important. When I reached her door, I didn't go in right away. I looked through the small window first, expecting to see her resting like always. That's when I saw the cat at the end of her bed. I stayed still outside the room, trying to process what I was seeing without jumping to conclusions that felt too heavy to accept. It looked exactly the same, and there was no way it could have been there. I opened the door slowly and stepped inside, and the room felt different, even though nothing had visibly changed. My mother was lying in bed, her breathing light but steady, and everything looked normal except for that one detail. I walked toward the bed, forcing myself to keep moving, and when I got closer, I looked directly at the cat, expecting it to react. It didn't move, didn't turn, didn't do anything that would make it feel like a normal animal. I reached out and grabbed it, acting without thinking, and I expected it to struggle or react in some way that would break the moment. Instead, it turned its head slowly and looked at me, and that look made me stop. I let go without deciding to, and it slipped back onto the bed in the same position. At that exact moment, the monitor behind me changed, and I turned toward my mother and called for help. Staff rushed in, and the room filled with movement, and I stepped back, watching everything while trying to understand what was happening. When I looked again at the bed, the cat was gone. They worked on her for several minutes, and I watched everything closely, knowing what each step meant and what it led to. There's a point when you understand the outcome before anyone says it, and I reached that point while they were still trying. When they stopped, the room became quiet, and one of the nurses looked at me without speaking, and I didn't need her to explain anything. I stayed there after they left, sitting next to the bed and trying to connect what I had seen with what I knew. I didn't see the cat as something that caused it, because that didn't match what I had observed before. It felt more like something that appeared when the outcome was already decided, like a signal that didn't need explanation. I went back to work after some time, and everything looked the same, but I wasn't. I moved through the hospital with a different kind of awareness, and I stopped trying to question things I couldn't change. I still see the cat sometimes, and every time it appears, the pattern repeats without variation, and I don't try to interfere anymore. There are limits to what we can do, even in a place where we're supposed to fix things. People are afraid of death, and that makes sense, but after everything I've seen, I don't think fear is the only way to face it. There are things in life that don't explain themselves and don't need to. If I ever see that cat at the end of my own bed, I don't think I'll try to push it away. Now I understand it isn't there to harm me. He'll just come to tell me that my time has come. The cat of death is a popular belief that has circulated in several hospitals. According to legend, when a black cat perches at the foot of a patient's bed, it foretells their death. It is believed that the cat approaches and curls up next to patients who are near death. I decided to be a surrogate so a couple could have children, but they lied to me the whole time. Wait until you hear what I found inside that house. I went there to see one baby and walked into a place that had more than 20. When I signed the contract, the woman from the agency explained the process and made it sound simple, as if I was just helping a couple who had no other way to have a child. The couple was older than I expected, and from the beginning they acted attentive in a way that made it easy to trust them. Since they showed up to every appointment, asked about my health, and made sure I had everything I needed. The pregnancy went smoothly, and they paid for everything without hesitation, so I focused on getting through it while telling myself that I was doing something useful, even if part of me kept wondering what would happen after the birth. When the baby was born, they took him as agreed, and I stayed in that hospital bed trying to process it while they walked out of the room. And even though I knew this was part of the deal, something about it did not sit right. The days after the birth did not feel normal, and even though I tried to move on, I kept thinking about the baby and wondering if he was okay, since the couple did not contact me at all after taking him. At first I told myself they needed time, but the silence continued. That surprised me because of how they acted before, since they used to check on me constantly during the pregnancy. I went back to the agency and asked if everything was fine, and their response was short and distant, as they repeated that the couple requested privacy and that I should respect the agreement. That answer did not convince me, so I went home, found the address in my documents, and after thinking about it for a long time, I decided to go there just once to see the baby and then leave. The house stood out from everything around it, and even though the lights were on inside, it felt closed off, as if the people there did not want anyone to come close or ask questions. I stood at the gate for a while before pressing the bell, and when no one answered, I noticed movement behind one of the windows, which made it clear that someone was inside, but choosing not to open the door. I pressed the bell again and waited longer, and the silence started to feel intentional, like they were watching me and waiting for me to give up and leave. I moved along the fence and found a section that was not fully secured, and after hesitating, I pushed through and stepped into the yard, telling myself I would just take a quick look and leave. Before getting closer, I slowed down and paid attention to the surroundings. Something about the place felt wrong, and I noticed toys scattered across the ground in a way that did not look like normal play. I reached a window and looked inside, and what I saw made me stop completely, since the room was full of children, far more than I expected, and most of them were very young. They were not playing or interacting, and many looked neglected, with some lying on thin mattresses while others sat on the floor without any supervision, which made no sense in a house like that. I tried to count them again, but there were too many, and the situation became clear in a way that made it impossible to ignore what I was seeing. While I was still trying to understand it, I heard a door open behind me, and the sound was close enough to make it clear that I had been noticed. When I turned around, the man from the couple was standing there, and his expression was completely different from what I remembered. He looked tense and focused in a way that made it clear he was not surprised to see me. "You were told not to come here." He was blocking my path, so I stepped back and told him I just wanted to see the baby.
"I just want to see him."
He did not respond right away, and instead he watched me in silence. "You signed an agreement, and that should have been enough." I pointed toward the window and told him I had seen the children, and I asked him why there were so many and why they looked like that. And this time his expression shifted to irritation. "You are asking things that do not concern you." I told him I was going to report everything, and at that moment he stepped closer and grabbed my arm with a grip that hurt immediately, and his calm attitude disappeared completely. "You are not leaving right now." He pulled me toward the back of the house, and I tried to resist, but he kept moving, dragging me across the yard while I looked around for anything that could help me break free. Before reaching the door he was aiming for, I noticed it was different from the others, made of metal and secured, and when he opened it, I saw a staircase leading down into a dark space. He pushed me toward the stairs, and I held onto the frame with both hands, using all my strength to stop myself from being forced inside, while he kept pulling and telling me to move. "Get inside and stop resisting," I refused, and asked what was down there, but he did not answer. And instead he pulled harder, making my grip start to slip as I tried to hold on. I looked around quickly and saw a heavy plant pot on a small table next to the door, so I reached for it while still trying to keep my balance. He pulled again, and my hands lost grip for a moment, which gave me just enough space to turn and swing the pot toward his head with everything I had. The impact made him step back and loosen his grip, and even though he stayed on his feet, that moment was enough for me to push him away and move out of his reach. I ran across the yard without stopping, focusing only on getting out of there, and I did not look back as I pushed through the fence and reached the street. I kept running until I found people nearby, since I did not feel safe stopping anywhere close to that house. I went straight to the police and explained everything, including the contract, the house, the children, and what had just happened, and even though it sounded extreme, the details made them take it seriously. They sent a team that same night, and I stayed there waiting, going over every moment in my head while trying to make sense of what I had seen. After some time, officers returned and confirmed that the house had been entered, and what they found matched my description, including the number of children and their condition. They also found the basement, and it was set up with small rooms and equipment that suggested this had been happening for a long time with multiple surrogacy cases. The couple was arrested, and the investigation showed that they had used different women, telling each of them the same story while hiding what they were actually doing. A week later, I went back to the hospital to ask about the baby I carried, and even though I explained everything, they could not give me any information due to the ongoing investigation. I kept thinking about the children inside, especially the younger ones, and the way they were left without proper care, which made it impossible to ignore how serious the situation was. No one has been able to explain why the couple had so many children or what they intended to do with them, and that lack of answers makes everything harder to process. The only thing I know is that I got out before it was too late, and that what I saw inside that house is something I will not forget. Sylvia Zhang and Guojun Xuan are under investigation for having 21 children through surrogacy. The couple was arrested after a hospital reported a traumatic head injury sustained by one of their 2-month-old children. According to authorities, they lied to the mothers, telling them they could not have children. The motives are unknown, but suspicions of child trafficking have been raised.
My shift at the old hospital started like any other. Night shift. The worst. The place was massive, a mix of old and new buildings. But the section I worked in was being demolished to make way for a new neonatology wing. That meant fewer people around, just a handful of security and maintenance workers. Fewer witnesses to whatever the hell was happening inside those halls. I had been working there for months, mostly routine stuff, checking on water lines, removing old piping, making sure no squatters had sneaked in. But everyone knew something was off about that place. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans of an old building. Things moved. Sounds came from rooms that should have been empty, and sometimes you just felt watched. That night, I had one job. Inspect the remains of the demolished section. Make sure everything was clear before the construction crew came in the morning. I had my flashlight, my radio, and a deep sense of dread. The air inside the abandoned pavilion was thick with dust and something else. A staleness that didn't feel natural. As I moved through the hallways, my footsteps echoed, but the silence around me wasn't complete. There was something faint, distant. I don't know how to explain it. It was like running water. That made no sense. We had cut off the pipes weeks ago. I turned the corner toward the old sinks. A slow drip echoed, then another. The faucets were open, all of them. I tightened them, making sure they were shut, but the sound continued. I could hear water splashing against tile, but the sinks were dry. I should have walked away, caught it in and left, but something pulled me further. Down the hall past the old patients' rooms, past the collapsed section that led to the morgue. That's when I saw them. I can't express in words the fear I felt in that moment. I saw figures. Figures in front of me just at the edge of my light. Moving, disappearing when I turned to look. I felt the first real wave of fear hit me, but I had seen shadows before. Tricks of the mind, I told myself. But then the crying started. At first it was faint, like a distant echo from another room. A baby crying. But the more I walked, the louder it became. It wasn't normal crying. It was desperate, pained. Coming from the chapel. I stepped inside, the large wooden doors creaking open. The place was dark, empty. Rows of pews stretched before me, and at the far end, near the altar, stood a figure. A nurse. She was facing away, her uniform old, yellowed with time. A long white apron over a blue dress, a cap covering her hair. She stood perfectly still. I took a cautious step forward. She moved. She didn't turn, she just moved a few inches closer. The sound of the baby crying grew unbearable. It was right next to me now, but there was no child in sight. She lifted her foot and tapped it against the wooden floor. Once, twice. My legs twitched, my muscles clenched as if something unseen was forcing me up. The second her foot touched the ground again, I stumbled back, barely catching myself before falling. When I raised my head again, the crying stopped and the nurse was gone. I ran, down the hall past the old offices, but the building didn't feel the same anymore. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. I reached for my radio. Static. I heard sounds of footsteps behind me. They were slow, deliberate. I didn't want to check my surroundings, but I still did. I don't know why, but it was sure as hell I regretted doing that. I saw a dark liquid seeping from the walls, pooling on the tiles. Blood. While I was running, a door slammed shut down the hall. Then another. One by one, the rooms were closing, forcing me forward, toward the old operating room. The second I stepped inside, the door behind me slammed shut. The overhead light flickered on. Something shifted in the corner of the room. A shape, while the air turned ice cold. There was the figure of the nurse again, twitching violently, its back to me. She was convulsing, jerking its limbs at unnatural angles. Then it stopped. Slowly, it turned to me. I didn't wait. I grabbed the nearest metal tray and threw it. The sound echoed as the thing lunged. She was right in front of me, and she easily grabbed my neck in seconds. Its hands were ice cold, gripping my throat. Fingernails bit into my skin. I thrashed, kicking, clawing. My hand found a scalpel. I drove it into whatever was above me. Her grip loosened. I shoved the thing off me and crawled toward the door, fumbling with the lock. The blood on the walls began dripping faster, soaking my clothes. The door finally gave way. I ran. I didn't stop. Past the collapsing hallway, past the chapel, through the halls that felt wrong. The air was thick with the stench of blood. My boots slipped on the soaked floor. My breath was ragged, shallow. The entrance was just ahead. The old iron doors. I pushed forward, ignoring the cold hand that seemed to reach from the walls. The whispers growing louder. My hands hit the door. It was locked. No, no, no! This can't be! I pounded against it, throwing my weight. Something was coming. The footsteps behind me, faster, closer. I turned. It was someone with a flashlight. It was really blinding. I suddenly heard a woman's voice. "Hey, are you okay?" It was a nurse. I didn't know what she was doing there, but she seemed normal. I watched around her. The hospital was just like before. No blood, no ghost, nothing. Suddenly, the door in front of me was opened. I didn't try to talk to the nurse. I was too in shock. I just ran out of the building. The nurse probably thought I was a thief or that I'd gone crazy. I never went back. I quit the next day. They asked why, but I didn't have an answer they'd believe. A week later, the building was demolished. I sometimes think about what I lived that night. And then, a thought comes to my mind. What was a nurse with a flashlight doing in the abandoned part of the hospital? If the door was locked, how did she enter? If she heard someone and went to investigate, why would she be alone? You know, I'm probably mistaken, but if I didn't run that night, would I be here telling this story? This story is based on real events that took place at the Madariaga Hospital in Posadas, Argentina, an old medical center with a disturbing past. Several workers and witnesses reported paranormal occurrences in the old pavilions before they were demolished, including the cries of babies coming from the chapel, shadows that vanished when approached, and faucets turning on by themselves, even though the water supply had been cut off. One of the most terrifying apparitions is that of a nurse dressed in an old-fashioned uniform, who was said to touch people with her foot to make them stand up. The story gained even more attention when a photo taken before the demolition showed a ghostly figure among the rubble. Hospital workers insist the building had an unsettling energy, with doors slamming shut on their own, unexplained noises in empty rooms, and blood-like stains appearing on the walls and floors. Although the hospital has been modernized and much of the original structure no longer exists, accounts of terrifying experiences persist, fueling the legend that something still lingers in the place. Disclaimer: this animated story is inspired by a real-life mystery and has been reimagined as a work of fiction. My name is Alan Whitaker, and I worked as a janitor in the Blackwood Medical and Experimental Center for a year and a half. A period in my life that, while short-lived, left a dark and lasting imprint on my mental health and life as a whole. See, in 2021, I got the job through a friend's reference when I was 37. While the place was well known in our town of Hollow Creek, the Blackwood facility was notoriously known as a place most people didn't want to be in. And it was only after I started as the janitor that it became clear why. Soon enough, I found myself dreading the hours between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. when I had to go in every day to work because, honestly, walking into those halls every night felt like the start of a horror movie. The hallways were so narrow, they gave off a never-ending vibe, and the dim light bulbs above flickered vigorously. All you could hear was the sound of huge fan blades turning slowly, and the screams of tortured and suffering people that the facility called patients. Everyone knew they weren't patients, though. If anyone claimed they didn't know, one visit to this place would convince them otherwise. Yet people would walk in every day and admit family members, friends, and probably enemies, all hoping the facility would perform bizarre experiments and treatments, mess them up and write it off as some medical issue. The screams were what I heard every night as I rolled my cart through the halls. The worst part? Many reports had been filed over the years, but the facility had deep roots in the government, so investigations either ended before they started or dragged on as never-ending cases in court. Now, admittedly, the thought of quitting crossed my mind several times, but things at home were so bad at the time that I simply couldn't, and as a result, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and before I knew it, I was pushing my cart through those narrow, dark halls, trying hard to focus on nothing but cleaning and minding my own business. One night, on May 29th, 2023, I went in for work around 7:30 p.m. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but from the moment I reached the tall iron gates of the facility, something felt very wrong. The building's already dark vibe seemed even worse that night, and goosebumps had appeared all over my body before I'd taken a step inside. As usual, I shook the feeling off and got to work. At first, everything seemed as normal as it could be, but the atmosphere that night felt extra thick, and unexpected chills ran down my spine throughout my shift. I hurriedly did my job, and at around 10 p.m., I began wheeling the cart to the east wing to finish up cleaning. Aside from the heavy hum of the fan blades, there was an unusual silence in the facility. The only other sound was the loud creak of my cart's tires as I walked down the seemingly endless hall. It took me a while to notice the silence as I'd gotten good at drowning out the usual noise. But after I eventually picked up on how strange it was, I rubbed it off and kept moving. As I walked, I found myself staring at the floor, and although the dim lights barely let me see, I noticed the towels were darker and dirtier than usual, with strange mold growing along the edges. It didn't seem out of the ordinary at first, but I couldn't take my focus off the mold. As just like everything else that night, something felt very wrong about it. That's when I noticed it. A twitch, barely noticeable, followed by another. Then I realized what was wrong with the mold. I couldn't explain it at the time, and I honestly thought I was losing my mind, but it almost looked like the mold was moving away from something, slow but desperately dragging itself across the floor. Shocked, I muttered under my breath, "What the hell?" and bent over slowly to get a closer look. Suddenly, the silence was shattered with a loud crash of glass breaking, accompanied by shards flying everywhere. Terrified, I dropped to the floor, covering my head with my hands. After the crash, all I heard was a thud followed by silence. I got up slowly and was met with the horrific sight of a black bird lying in my cart, its neck broken and its eyes bulging. In that moment, it was glaringly obvious that something was terribly wrong, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. As I turned to leave, I heard screams and sudden footsteps coming from behind me. The first doctor burst out from the East Wing, dressed in his full surgical attire, stained with blood. Behind him, I saw 3 more doctors in white coats, all running from something. I couldn't tell what it was, but with every fiber of my being already screaming to flee, the terrified look on the face of the doctor in blue was the last push I needed. I took off after him, scrambling for an exit and praying to whatever God might listen that I'd make it in time. The further I ran, the more terrified I became. My heartbeat was the only thing I could feel. Goosebumps covered my body, and the air was so thick it felt like the only way to breathe was to escape. Behind me, however, I could hear the others running, and the light bulbs began to burst systematically behind them. I glanced back when I heard the first scream, and what I saw was so horrific that my heart sank to my stomach. A shadowy arm emerged from the darkness, moving impossibly fast. It didn't seem real or physical, but for a brief second, I glimpsed what looked like a rotten face with long, matted hair. Before I could process, the arm wrapped around the leg of the last doctor in white. And as he tried to keep running, his knee popped out of place, and he let out a blood-curdling scream before being dragged into the darkness. One by one, the footsteps behind me went silent. Then out of nowhere, I felt cold fingers wrap around my ankle, pulling me to the ground, and no matter how hard I struggled and clawed at the floor, I too was slowly dragged into the darkness. I expected to be dead once I was pulled into the dark, but when I wasn't, I opened my eyes slowly, barely able to make out anything around me. The entire building was now plunged into darkness, but I'd been in those halls long enough to navigate them. I leaned against the walls, feeling my way from wing to wing without issue. Finally, as I turned into the stairwell leading to the back exit, I noticed a black wheelchair blocking the path. As I approached, it turned around slowly, revealing the long-haired figure from earlier. This time, I had a clearer view of the man. His body was covered in surgical scars and incisions, his flesh pale and decayed. It was then that I fully understood what was happening. The horrors of this place and its doctors had finally caught up to them. Don't get me wrong, the figure in front of me was utterly terrifying, radiating a dark energy. But I could tell that if I was meant to be dead, I would have been. Soon enough, he was gone. I left the facility and never spoke of that night to anyone until now. The town was shocked to find the dismembered corpses of the doctors in the days that followed, and the facility was temporarily closed before shutting down permanently in early 2025, in yet another attempt to bury its secrets. That night scarred me, and the nightmares and anxiety won't fade easily, or anytime soon. Visions of the man's disfigured body and the doctor's screams still haunt me, but in a way, I believe it was for the greater good. What I know for certain, though, is that whatever dark secrets are kept, there are even darker things lingering, watching, and one day, they might just come out of hiding. This story is loosely inspired by mysterious CCTV footage that caused a stir on the web in late 2024, depicting supernatural behavior in a medical facility somewhere in Ohio. The footage left many viewers shaken and many others with questions. But to this very day, all questions remain unanswered. I work night shifts in the basement of St. Marcus Hospital. It's just me, metal drawers, and dead people. No sunlight, no noise, just fluorescent lights that buzz too loud and the slow hum of the refrigeration unit. I don't mind being alone. The bodies never bothered me. They stay where they're put, and they don't talk back. That night started like any other. 3 arrivals, 1 transfer, all tagged, all documented. Everything was logged at 1:42 a.m. I signed in a burn victim from a car crash, no ID. They'd labeled him John Doe. No relatives claimed him. The sheet said he came in with a partial skull fracture, burns on 60% of the body, and some missing teeth. His eyes were listed as intact. That part stayed with me. I didn't think much about it at the time. I wheeled him in and placed him in drawer 17B, locked it. I wrote up the file, scanned the barcode, and went for coffee. The hallway was dead quiet, like always. The kind of silence you don't really hear until you notice it's too perfect. About an hour after, I went back in to clean up the station. That's when I noticed something was off. The door to 17B was sticking out an inch. That should have been impossible. These drawers lock when fully closed. I pulled it open and saw the body inside, but something was wrong. He was twisted around, like someone shoved him in backward. Head facing the wrong way, arms crossed awkwardly. I straightened the body and checked for the toe tag. It was gone. I checked again. Nothing. No name, no hospital stamp. The barcode sticker I placed on the drawer earlier was missing too. That doesn't happen. Ever. I went to the logbook. His file was gone. Not deleted, gone. The folder was just empty. No record, no ID, no autopsy scheduled. It was like he never existed. I stood there, still holding the clipboard. I'd heard the ventilation unit click on. The fan spun up, then died. Then started again, slow and stuttering, like it was jammed. I walked over and looked at the grate. The hum got louder, but the air coming out wasn't cold. It was warm, and it smelled of not rot, not chemicals, something else, something sharp and coppery. Then the hum stopped completely, and for 5 full seconds, I swear I heard breathing. Slow, thick, wet breathing, right on the other side of the vent. I stared at that vent too long. When I blinked, I thought I saw movement behind the grate. Just for a second. A flicker, something pulling back. I stepped forward, leaned in with my flashlight. The light caught 2 round shapes. They blinked, fast, not animal eyes, not human. Something was alive in there. Then it was gone. I stumbled backward, knocking over the metal stool behind me. My flashlight hit the floor. I scrambled to grab it, but the room was already different. Colder, but not from the AC. It felt wrong. Not the kind of wrong you explain. The kind that makes your skin pull tight, like your body knows something your brain doesn't. I turned toward the body. Drawer 17B was open again. All the way out. Empty. The sheet was still there. The shape of the body still pressed into it. But he was gone. There was no sound, no dragging, no movement. He just wasn't there anymore. And I was alone in that room, holding a flashlight with nothing but empty metal drawers and cold air around me. I backed out slowly. Every drawer locked shut, but my eyes kept going back to the ceiling tiles. One of them had shifted just slightly, like something pushed up against it from the other side. That's when one of the tiles dropped, hit the floor, and shattered. I ran. I sprinted out of the morgue into the hallway and turned toward the security station. The overhead lights started going out behind me, one by one. With each step I took, another light died. I didn't stop. I knew if I turned around, I'd see him, or it. And I couldn't risk seeing what wasn't supposed to be walking. I made it to the security room, slammed the door, locked it, and pulled up the monitors. Camera 4 covering the morgue was out, just static. The other cameras were fine, until they weren't. One by one, they cut to black, except for the feed from the hallway just outside the morgue. That one stayed on, and I saw something crawl past it. Not walk, crawl, like a man dragging himself with his elbows only. I heard a thud above me. The vent again. I dragged the metal shelf over and climbed it. Screwed the vent shut with my pocket tool. That's when I realized how useless everything was. No cell service in the basement, no backup, no exit. The elevator was locked for the night. I was boxed in with that thing. The only other unlocked room nearby was the med supply closet. I ran inside, locked the door behind me. Fluorescent light flickered overhead. The room stank of iodine and plastic. I moved between shelves, trying to find a weapon. That's when I heard the sound. Not a footstep, a tap, repeated like someone drumming fingers against metal, slowly, just to be heard. When I turned, he was there, standing still between the shelves, bare skin, no clothes. His body was covered in fresh burn marks, but not blackened. Pink, raw, like the skin had been peeled back and never healed. His mouth hung open, no tongue, just teeth, some broken, some cracked. His eyes were moving, fast, darting side to side like a trapped animal. One arm was dragged behind him. He didn't make a sound, just stepped forward. I picked up a fire extinguisher and threw it. It hit his shoulder. He didn't react. He lunged, fast. Not human fast, animal fast. He slammed into me and knocked me to the floor. His skin was hot, not warm, hot. I grabbed a metal pole and smashed it into his face. He didn't bleed, just kept coming, mouth open, eyes wide. I scrambled up, ran back into the hallway. My legs were weak, my chest burned. I could feel his weight behind me. He never stopped moving. I hit the morgue door, got it open, and dove inside. Locked it, slammed the cold drawer cart in front. I turned to face the room. The lights flickered once, then off. A second later, the metal drawers all began to rattle. Soft at first, then louder, one after another shaking violently. Drawer 17B slid open. He was inside, climbing out slowly. Head first, eyes locked on me. No rush. That didn't make any sense. The corpse was behind me, chasing me. How could it possibly be there? And at that moment, a disturbing thought crossed my mind. What if the corpse never chased me? What if whatever this dead person was wanted me to come here, to lock myself in with them? Was this the first time I was face to face with the corpse? I felt like a trapped mouse, deceived and manipulated by something I couldn't understand. But I knew one thing. One way or another, I wasn't going to let him hurt me without defending myself. I grabbed the bone saw. No time to think, just swung, hit his arm. It cracked, bent the wrong way. He grabbed me with the other, pulled me down. I dropped the saw and stabbed him in the side with a scalpel. It went in deep. He didn't stop. His mouth closed around my shoulder. I screamed and slammed his head against the metal table. Once, twice, 3 times. He let go. I shoved him back into the drawer, slammed it shut, locked it. Then locked it again with chains. My hand was bleeding. I didn't care. I sat on the floor breathing hard, watching the drawer. He didn't move again. I stayed there for 3 more hours until sunrise. No one came. No one called. The hospital above was still running like nothing happened. But below, something had changed. I never went back. Quit the next day. Left the badge on the desk. Didn't answer their calls. 2 weeks later, I saw the news. Basement of St. Marcus under investigation. No reason given. I tried to forget. I failed. Every night I see the drawer. Drawer 17B. I see his eyes, open, unblinking. You think it ends when you close the body bag. It doesn't. Not always. Sometimes they open again. And when they do, they don't want out. They want you in. The operation ended at 3:12 a.m. I remember the clock because I stared at it for a full minute before I could even take my gloves off. Thomas Griggs came in with a stab wound to the abdomen, deep enough to cut through bowel and nick the liver. It took me almost 9 hours to close him up. I was soaked in sweat, my fingers cramped, legs trembling. Not from fear, from exhaustion. He was unconscious the whole time, eyes fluttering a few times but never opening. I thought he was just another patient I dragged back from the edge. He wasn't. When I sat down in the staff lounge, someone had printed his intake form. That's when I saw the police note. Suspected in domestic homicide. Wife found dead in residence. No charges. Ongoing investigation. I dropped the paper and stared at the floor. It didn't change anything. At least, that's what I told myself. But there was something in the way he looked in the OR. Not desperate, not scared. He looked like someone waiting for a storm that never came. I left the hospital an hour later, barely able to keep my eyes open. I don't remember the drive home. I think I slept 3 hours that morning, maybe 4. But I didn't feel rested. My arms were heavy when I got up. Not sore, just drained, like I had something clinging to me I couldn't shake off. The exhaustion didn't lift over the next few days. I drank coffee, ate protein bars, took vitamins. Nothing helped. Every step through the hospital halls felt heavier. My body responded slower. My head would throb in rooms without sound. I chalked it up to burnout. Normal, considering the schedule. But there was something else behind it. A pressure that built gradually, like a sound just below hearing. Something I couldn't name. Small things started to stand out. I'd hear someone behind me in the stairwell, but when I turned, no one was there. One night, I left the OR late and saw a faint shape through the glass of the surgical supply room. It wasn't clear. It was just standing motionless, between racks of gauze and gloves. I stared at it for too long. When I opened the door, the motion sensor lights flicked on and the room was empty. I walked out and told myself not to come back there alone again. I started avoiding room 303. That's where we put Griggs post-op. Even just walking by made my chest tighten. I didn't want to see him. I couldn't explain it. I felt like he watched me more than anyone else. Not just with his eyes, with something else. Something I couldn't point to. The nurses said he barely moved, barely spoke. But they said that when he did speak, he only asked about his son. At night, I'd dream I was still in surgery. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, thinking I forgot to suture something. Once I woke up and saw the light in my hallway was on. I live alone. I kept it off. The door was still locked. Nothing missing. But I started locking my bedroom door after that. I thought I was losing my mind. Then the kid showed up. I was reviewing charts when one of the nurses told me that Griggs' son was visiting with relatives. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't scheduled to see them. I kept working. But on my way to radiology, I saw the boy. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, completely still. He was facing me, not blinking. I slowed my steps. He didn't flinch. There was no noise around us, no machines, no charts, no monitors beeping. Just him staring down the hallway like he was watching something behind me. I called out to him. He didn't answer. I took another step. "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" That's when his face changed. His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to scream but couldn't. Then he turned and ran, bolting around the corner like something was chasing him. His aunt came running after him seconds later, apologizing. She said he'd been acting strange ever since he'd heard his dad was alive. He'd had nightmares, sometimes refused to sleep, sometimes pointed at the ceiling and said she was there. She didn't explain who she was. That night, I stayed late again. I felt wired but sluggish, like my body didn't want to move, but my brain wouldn't stop. I stayed late in my office organizing reports, trying to keep my mind off everything. I told myself I'd leave by 9. I packed my things, I turned off the lights. That's when the door slammed shut behind me. There was no sound, no draft. The door closed with force that shook the glass. Everything felt silent. Not hospital quiet. Not nightmare quiet. This was the kind of silence that fills your head like pressure underwater. Something yanked my hair backward, hard. My body twisted before I even hit the floor. My back slammed into the linoleum. I couldn't see who or what did it. I screamed, but it came out as a grunt. I was dragged by the scalp, heels kicking, papers flying off my desk. Then it stopped. I was flung toward the door. My head hit the lower part of it, just above the handle. I scrambled to get up, face bleeding, vision swimming. I crawled to the windowsill on the door, tried to see who was outside. I leaned in too close. My head slammed into the glass. I didn't do it. I didn't move. Something forced my face into the small square window and held it there. The wood dug into my cheek. Then it started pushing harder. Not fast. Slow, deliberate. I felt my skin slide against it, the pain growing with each inch. I couldn't pull back. My arms flailed, but my body wouldn't respond right. My mouth opened to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the pressure. Suddenly, it let go. I collapsed, rolled over gasping. Blood ran down my face. I tried to stand, but a force hit me from the side, knocking me into the cabinet. Then again from the back. I staggered out of the office, each step thrown sideways by something invisible. I ran into walls, clipped corners, bruised everything. I crawled the last stretch down the hall. I don't remember passing the nurses. I heard them yelling, but I couldn't respond. I just wanted out. I needed distance. I needed air. I didn't go back the next day. I barely slept. I had bruises on my ribs, cuts on my cheek. I didn't care. I wanted to pretend the hospital didn't exist. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my supervisor. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he didn't ask how I was. He mentioned my injuries. He just said one thing. You need to come in. It's urgent. It's Griggs. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to throw the phone out the window, but I said I'd come. I didn't know why. I walked into the hospital, shaking. The nurses didn't look me in the eyes. One of them just pointed toward room 303. I walked in with 2 other staff. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something had happened. The air smelled different. Not rotten, not chemical, just steel, thick. Thomas Griggs was dead. His mouth hung open, eyes bloodshot. A pillow was on the floor. His face was purple, strangled, not by hands, not by cords, just pressed until there was nothing left. I looked around. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was moved. The machines had stopped beeping 30 minutes before. No alarms were triggered. The nurse on shift said she stepped out for 10 minutes, came back, and found him like that. There were no signs of struggle, no skin under his nails. The camera footage showed his vitals flailing. Nobody walked in. Nobody walked out. But he died. Not gently, not painlessly. He was smothered, and there was no one there. The autopsy confirmed asphyxiation by compression. No fingerprints, no trace evidence. They ruled it an accident or suicide. Nobody believed that, but nobody said otherwise. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. No dreams, no whispers, no bruises in the morning. Whatever was following me stopped. 3 days passed. I avoided the ICU. I kept my shifts light. I didn't want to see room 303. I didn't want to be near it. I didn't tell anyone what happened in my office. I wasn't ready to be called insane. Then the kid came back. I saw his aunt and uncle first. They were pale, tense. The man had his phone out. He walked straight toward me and said we needed to talk. I almost walked away. Then he showed me the screen. It was a video recorded during their first visit. The hallway, me walking out of my office. The kid's camera had been aimed at me from a distance. But that wasn't the focus. Next to me, half a step behind, was a tall black shape. No features, no movement. It was just there, standing with me like it belonged. I couldn't speak. I stared at the figure, feeling the blood drain from my face. Then the kid, quiet all the time, said it. The only words he spoke. "It's her. That's Mommy." There was no room for doubt. The shape hadn't glitched. It hadn't faded. It had stood, watching, waiting. And the kid, he recognized her. His mother, dead, murdered, and now standing next to me. The air around me felt like ice. I gave the phone back without a word. I walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I couldn't. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, lights on, back against the wall. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I kept thinking of the pressure against my face, the dragging, the bruises, and that boy. That boy who looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. He thought he'd escaped. I saved a killer, and I think something made sure he didn't stay saved for long. I left trauma shortly after that, switched to outpatient care. Paperwork and follow-up. No surgeries, no late nights. I didn't say why. Nobody asked. I think they all felt something was off. They just didn't want to know more. Sometimes late at night, I think about the figure, about her, about what she did. The attacks, the pain, the fear. She hated me, and I couldn't blame her. I saved the one who killed her. She couldn't speak, but she didn't have to. I haven't seen the kid since that last visit. I think about him more than I'd like. I wonder if he sleeps now, if she still visits him, or if she finally left for good after finishing what she came for. I don't talk about what happened, not to friends, not to therapists. There are no words that make it sound real. But I did buy a camera. I keep it in my apartment, always on, because sometimes when I'm alone, I feel the floor creak behind me, and I need to know if she ever comes back.
My name's Rachel. I work night shifts at St. Matthew's Hospital. It's not a big place, and the third floor is usually empty except for a few long-term patients. That night, I was covering it alone. The other nurse called in sick, and they couldn't find a replacement. I was tired, but I stayed. I didn't have a choice. Room 319 was still occupied. Her name was Linda. Late 60s, no family nearby. I'd spent most of my breaks with her over the past few weeks. She barely spoke, but when she did, she always asked for me. She used to be a nurse too. We had this quiet bond. That night, she wasn't doing too well. Her breathing was irregular, her heart rate unstable. She needed observation, and I didn't want to leave her alone. By 2 a.m., the halls were dead quiet. All the lights were on, monitors were steady. I sat at the nurse's station watching the vitals through the central screen. That's when I heard something move down the hall. A slow, dragging sound. Plastic over linoleum. I thought maybe someone was up. Maybe a patient had wandered. I stood up and walked down the hallway toward the sound. All the doors were shut, except for one. Room 319. It was open. I stepped in. Linda was asleep, or at least her eyes were closed. But the room felt off. The air wasn't cold, but heavy in a way that I hadn't felt before. I looked at her monitor. It was on, but the data was frozen, heart rate flat, numbers stuck. I tapped the screen and it blinked back to normal. Then a loud click behind me made me jump. The door had shut, hard. I turned and opened it again, but it creaked like it had been oiled in years. I was starting to feel dizzy. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 2:43 a.m. The moment I unlocked it, the screen glitched, static green lines, then black. The flashlight turned on by itself, then shut off. The screen went dead. I shoved it back into my pocket and stepped into the hallway. That's when I noticed it. The chair from the waiting area, the one always against the wall, was now in the middle of the hallway. And it wasn't just moved. It was facing room 319. No footsteps, no noise, nothing. I went back to the nurse's station and tried calling security. The line didn't connect. No dial tone, just silence. I stood there a moment. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't ready for what came next. The hallway lights flickered, not random. One by one, down the line, starting from the far end and moving toward me. I turned and looked at the camera monitor, but the feeds were all black, like they'd been unplugged. No signal, no backup. I stood still, listening. Then I heard the wheels. Not fast, just rolling. Something metal, unsteady. I peeked around the corner. A gurney was rolling on its own, slow, uneven, one broken wheel, and it was squeaking. It stopped just outside room 319. Then silence. It didn't make sense. There was no incline, no push. I backed up toward the station when I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. A man, pale skin, hospital gown. Too tall. He wasn't facing me, just standing still, his head tilted like he was listening to something inside the wall. I whispered, "Hey." He didn't react. I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. I heard Linda scream. I ran. I burst into room 319. She was sitting up, eyes wide open, mouth open, with no sound coming out. Her hands gripped the sheets like she was holding on to something invisible. I rushed to her side and checked the monitor. Blank screen again. I tried to calm her, but her eyes weren't looking at me. They were locked on the corner of the room. That's when I saw it. Something crawling across the ceiling. Fast, then still. Like a spider, but wrong, too human. Limbs bent the wrong way. It didn't drop or jump, it just let go like it was made of rope. It hit the floor hard, but didn't fall. It stood up. I grabbed Linda by the arm and tried to pull her up, but she wouldn't move. Her whole body was stiff like stone. The thing took a step forward. Its face wasn't a face. No features, just flesh stretched tight over where eyes and a mouth should have been. I backed up, dragging the wheelchair toward the door. It didn't chase us. It turned its head toward the door and vanished. One blink. Gone. But the door slammed shut again. Locked. I pulled and kicked at it, while Linda kept whispering the same words over and over again. "He came back. He came back. He came back." I tried to ask what she meant, but her voice cracked and she froze again. The lights flickered. The emergency alarm sounded 3 times, then cut out. The intercom switched on, full of static. A voice, soft, broken, said something. Just one word. "Stay." I pushed Linda down the hallway as fast as the old wheelchair would let me. Her breathing had slowed again, but she was still awake. Her eyes locked on something behind me. I didn't want to look. I just wanted to reach the elevator. I kept my head forward and focused on the green glow of the exit sign. Then I heard it. bare feet slapping the floor, wet and heavy, like something crawling at first, and then rising into a run. I looked back once. He was there. Same man from earlier. Hospital gown dragging, arms stiff and wrong. His face had no eyes, no mouth, just skin, like it had been pulled over something else. But he moved like a man. Fast. I turned a corner too hard. The wheelchair clipped the wall and tipped halfway over. Linda cried out, but I didn't stop. I yanked it back upright and kept moving. The man was getting closer. His steps echoed fast, like he was gaining momentum with every second. I pushed harder, my arms burning, my legs starting to lock up. We reached the end of the hallway. The elevator was still 3 doors away. The light above it was dead. I didn't know if it worked. I looked at Linda. She was trying to speak, her mouth barely moving. I froze for a second, and then I ran. I let go of the wheelchair and sprinted down the hall. I didn't look back. I didn't say anything. I heard metal scraping. Maybe the chair falling again. Maybe Linda's body hitting the ground. I don't know. I didn't stop. I reached the elevator. I slammed the button, but nothing lit up. I hit it again and again. No response. The lights above the door flickered once, then stayed off. I turned around, breathing hard, throat burning. He was halfway down the hallway now. He didn't walk like before. He charged. His feet slapped harder, his arms swinging unnaturally. His neck snapped to the side like he didn't know how to balance. His face was still blank, but I could feel his focus locked on me. I ran again, down the stairs this time. I skipped steps, slammed into the wall at the landing, then down to the next floor. My shoes slipped on the tile. My shoulder hit the railing, but I didn't stop. I didn't scream. I just wanted out. I burst into the first floor. The reception desk was empty. I ran across the lobby, shoved the front door open, and hit the parking lot. The night air was sharp and cold. There were cars, but no people. I kept running until I hit the sidewalk. Then I collapsed on the grass, hands shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. I never went back to St. Matthew's. I filed my resignation 2 days later. I never told them what happened. I didn't even ask about Linda. I couldn't. If she died, it was my fault. And if she didn't, I still left her. Either way, I didn't want the answer. I still don't understand why I left her alone that night. Part of me wants to think it was something about that entity, whatever it was, that influenced me. But another part of me thinks otherwise. I was afraid. I was more afraid than I'd ever been in my life. So afraid that I was willing to let a defenseless woman die so that I could survive.
Have you ever had to close a food restaurant on the last shift? My name is Alex, and it happened to me while working at Taco Bell. This Taco Bell was pretty special though. Since it was located in a very secluded town, I'd say it even operated by its own set of rules. Unlike the city Taco Bell, here we had fewer employees because, truth be told, we didn't need them. I was the newest of the bunch, and honestly, I liked the job. I had a good group of people, and everyone was very patient with me, even though I was a little clumsy. Everything was going well. I was learning the job very quickly, until one night, I was assigned to the night shift. Since the restaurant was so small, only one person stayed on the night shift to close it, and since I had already been working there for a few months, they trusted me. Closing the place wasn't hard. Just giving everything a final cleaning, putting up the chairs, and locking up. I didn't even have to worry about closing the cash register because that was done by a colleague before leaving. The only rule we had to respect without exception was that we had to leave before 11:15 p.m. It was forbidden. I mean, absolutely forbidden to stay on the premises after midnight. To tell the truth, I thought it was something bureaucratic, but I knew it was more to it than that. The manager used to be a very permissive and carefree person, but regarding this issue, he was categorical. When I asked the rest of the employees what the reason was for this, they seemed to know the answer, but they didn't want to tell me. They would always tell me that it was better to just obey him, that someday they would tell me. I closed a few times on the night shift, always obeying the one rule of not going overtime. So I was trusted with the night shift more and more. Everything was going well until one fateful night, when by trusting me and not understanding that the time limit was put in place to protect me, I put my life at risk as I had never done before. That night, the restaurant was full. There was so much work. Luckily, my coworkers helped me. They moved several of my tasks forward so I could leave on time. When they left and the tables began to empty, I must admit that I made a terrible mistake. When cleaning the ice cream machine, I accidentally broke it, and the ice cream started pouring out nonstop. To make matters worse, while trying to fix the ice cream machine, I kicked the bucket, flooding the entire restaurant. I felt like the clumsiest person in the world. I couldn't let this mess stay until tomorrow, or I would surely get in trouble. Just for that night, I decided to stay a little longer to tidy up and pretend nothing had happened. My idea was to go over the deadline, but still finish before midnight. I hurried as fast as I could and finished cleaning up pretty quickly. I went on, and before I knew it, I was done. There was just one little problem. Oh no, it's 12:15. I wasn't going to tell anyone that this had happened to me, but at the same time, I couldn't stay in the restaurant for another minute. I tried to run to my locker to grab my things, but I tripped on the wet floor and fell to the ground. I hurt my arm in the fall, but that was no big deal. It was just a fall. The only problem was that it wasn't at all, because when I raised my head, something had changed. Suddenly, the good vibes in the restaurant disappeared, giving way to an atmosphere of enormous discomfort and the feeling that something was wrong. I don't know how to explain this. It was as if the air had changed. It was as if something was there with me, and that something was very oppressive. Scared, I raised my head. And that's when I saw it. A human figure, or at least it looked like one. But something was wrong. Its eyes were completely black, absorbing all the light around it, and its body seemed to be withered impossibly. I blinked several times, thinking it was an illusion. Maybe there was a gas leak. Maybe I hurt my head without realizing it. The only thing I knew was that no matter what or who was still there, I should move away, because what was in front of me looked very real, and I didn't want to be a victim of that horrendous being. Before I could try to rationalize what was happening, I could see that the shadow began to move slowly in my direction. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it would burst out of my chest. I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. I backed away slowly, frozen with fear. That figure was moving its legs, but it had no reason to do so since it was floating. Little by little, it began to get closer and closer. Something prevented me from running, as if this twisted and horrifying being was doing something to me. With a lot of effort, I managed to get up from the ground and try to walk, but things got even worse. Suddenly, I began to feel a strange pressure on my knee. The pressure became stronger and stronger and unbearable, and when I couldn't take the pain anymore, in a single second, my knee broke. Ah! I felt I had no more salvation. I started to crawl to the exit while crying in pain, praying that I had enough strength to make it alive for someone to save me. When I almost reached the exit door, my body froze completely. That being that was behind me got too close to me, and now he was only a few centimeters away from me. Having me at its mercy, the monster made a hand movement, and suddenly, I began to choke. It was as if my throat had temporarily stopped. No air was coming in or going out. I felt like I was going to die that very day. Suddenly, and to my rescue, the entrance door next to me opened violently, and without hesitation, he grabbed me and dragged me out of the room. Seeing his face, I realized it was someone I knew. It was my manager. "I told you to get out before midnight. Wasn't I not clear enough?" What? What was that? "We don't know what it is. We only know that it arrives at midnight and attacks whoever is in the place." But how come no one knows? How is this place still open? "This is a secret. If you tell anyone, we'll all be out of work. Understand?" "But it's dangerous." "Listen to me. We give work here to a lot of people who need it. Most of your colleagues have a family. We need this place. And as long as we respect the rules, nothing bad will happen." My manager's logic may be strange, but I must admit that I partly understood it. The situation of my coworkers and the people in this town is not the best, so having a place like Taco Bell is very good. Besides, I've been here for several months, and to be honest, nothing has ever happened to me before. I kept working there, but I learned to respect the rules. Every night at 11:15 p.m., I would leave everything ready to leave quickly when the time came. It didn't matter if there was any work to be done. I never encountered that entity again. But the lesson was clear. There are things in this world that we cannot understand, and sometimes it is better not to challenge the unknown. Since then, my mental clock has been set to leave any place before midnight.
How many of you like horror? I don't mean watching movies or playing horror video games. I mean defying the paranormal, doing extreme things to look for fear, like playing Ouija, doing urban explorations, and really taking risks in the face of the paranormal. Which of you really likes horror? I always considered myself a big horror fan, but there was always something that bothered me. What if it wasn't real? So I dedicated myself to challenging the paranormal, to prove the existence of something else. Not because I challenged the genre, but because I trusted it, because I knew I could have the ultimate horror experience. I asked for more than I could handle. After spending a lifetime searching for things I wasn't supposed to see, I never thought that the worst thing that could happen was to achieve my goal, since by that very fact, I would be faced with a situation that no living being should ever have to face. It all happened on a Friday night. My parents asked me to spend the weekend at their house to take care of their dog while they were away. I had moved a few years ago, and since the place I was renting was pretty small, I liked the idea of being in a bigger house for a change. But you know what the best thing about it was? That I would finally have enough space to play Daruma-san, also known as the bath game. I won't bore you with the details and get right to the action. Unlike many other games, Daruma-san is really difficult to play. Since not following the rules can make the game never happen, or even worse, make it work, but have Daruma-san attack you sooner than expected. I turned off all the lights in the house and immediately started playing. The first thing I did was fill the bathtub with water and lie down in it. As the game says, I began to wash my hair with my eyes closed, completing the ritual with what I had to say. Daruma-san fell down. 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 Just as the game anticipated it would happen to me, strange images began to gather in my brain. It was a woman coming out of the bathroom and slipping. As I opened my eyes, I thought for sure this was something out of my imagination. If the game says that I would imagine a woman stumbling out of a bathtub, it's obvious that I would imagine it, with or without something paranormal in the middle. As soon as I finished washing my hair, it all started. Suddenly, I felt like something was watching me. I don't know how to explain it to you. Maybe even what I felt at that moment doesn't make sense, but what my body felt, well, that made a lot of sense. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to confirm that what was watching me behind me was real, but I couldn't do it. The rules of the game said that I couldn't turn around and that I couldn't open my eyes no matter what. At that moment, I had no choice but to hold my curiosity and keep playing. After this question, the terrifying atmosphere around me became denser than ever. I was shivering at the thought of staying one more second in this bathtub. Luckily, the game was over, at least for tonight. Without opening my eyes, I got out of the bathtub without slipping, didn't let the water seep in, and went to sleep without turning on any lights. After all I did, the real game should start when I opened my eyes the next day. I must admit that although the game had not yet fully begun, that was the most traumatic night of my life. I spent the whole night having nightmares about a woman who came looking for me. That woman was missing an eye, just like Daruma-san. Throughout the whole dream, she didn't want to actively catch me. Once I woke up, I looked at myself in the mirror, somewhat asleep. As I gradually woke up, I remembered what I had done the night before. In case you don't know, Daruma-san is not about inviting a spirit into your bathtub. No. Daruma-san consists of summoning a spirit that during the next day will do everything possible to kill you. Immediately after remembering this, I began to feel the same thing I had felt the night before when I was in the bathtub. It was as if something was behind me, watching me, looking for the right moment to hurt me. According to the game, I was supposed to continue my normal routine that I would do any day. But this wasn't just any day. I was at my parents' house on a weekend. I had nothing to do and nowhere to go. Just staying at home, taking care of the dog or going out to buy something. I admit that part of me still thought this couldn't be real. Technically, I hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. I had just felt things that might not be there. I relaxed and decided to go watch TV. Real or not, I had nothing else to do. I lay down on the couch, attentive to everything that could be around me. Any shadow seemed suspicious. And I came to think, if it was real, Daruma-san could be anywhere. All the tension I was feeling soon began to fade as I saw no one. Within minutes, I was distracted by a TV show, and soon after I fell asleep. I knew I had just woken up, but the way I slept, having so many nightmares, a few extra hours of sleep wouldn't hurt. Ah! I always had very strong nightmares, and I always woke up with some sleepiness, but this I had seen, even for a fraction of a second, was real. I looked around, but Daruma-san was no longer there. On the other hand, something had changed. The house felt different from the way it had an hour ago when I had fallen asleep. Although it was still sunny outside, it was still very cold. I felt a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that wouldn't let me breathe. It was as if the spirit was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Somewhat confused, I stood up, disoriented, trying not to fall. I immediately realized that I had to finish the game as soon as possible. Otherwise, the spirit would kill me. I tried as hard as I could to remember the rules, but everything was a blur. I couldn't think. Was this a coincidence? Was it because I was nervous? Or maybe something was doing this to me? Think. The rules. She will always appear behind me. If I turn around and get to see her, all I have to do is say, Kita, and she'll be gone. I was very nervous, regretting playing this game and thinking that I might die that night. But somehow I managed to stay calm and use logic to survive. I stood against the wall. She couldn't attack me if I saw her. The air was getting heavy again. To my surprise, Daruma-san appeared in front of me, without any concealment at all. Her very presence chilled my blood. She was very difficult to see, as she was covered by a mist that hid a large part of her body. Her hair was black, and her skin was white and intense. She looked dead, and indeed she was. She approached slowly, floating and disorienting with every centimeter she advanced. When I was about to say the word to win the game, I realized I couldn't speak. This was not nerves. I felt something that did not allow me to speak. As I touched my throat, I could feel a lump in it. I was choking. As I struggled to breathe, Daruma slowly approached me. With every inch she took, the atmosphere became heavier, and I found it harder and harder to breathe. My vision was getting blurry. I was about to faint. Maybe this was for the best. I would rather have lost consciousness before Daruma-san caught me. My eyes started to close until suddenly I heard something. Slowly and indifferently, I could see Daruma-san turn her eyes to the dog. She was about to look at me again, but during that second, I realized something. I could breathe again. Kita! I had made it. Daruma-san was gone. I won the game. In shock, I fell to the floor and began to cry. From that day on, I never again risked provoking the paranormal. I started watching horror movies and playing video games. Sometimes some friends tell me to go on urban explorations, but I always say no. I don't need to go looking for ghosts anymore. I don't need to go looking for ghosts anymore. I've seen more than I was willing to see in a lifetime.
Everyone tells me that I should never get involved with the deep web. They tell me that it is a very dark place and that only bad things can come from it. Some people have even blamed me for the story I'm about to tell, as if I had anything to do with what happened. To those people, I always say the same thing. Do you know the worst thing about the deep web? Even if you don't do anything about it, even if you don't know it exists, you can get entangled in it. You can be its victim. And that is exactly what happened to me. I will tell you how it happened. My story begins on a field trip with my buddies. We were all scouts, and although we were an adult troop, we were only 18-year-old boys accompanied by an instructor. That day, we were just going to untie knots, make a campfire, and tell ghost stories. And that's exactly how the day started. We set up our tents around a circle where we were going to eat marshmallows later in the evening. Some of us were in charge of looking for wood. Others had to go exploring, and one of us, usually the most experienced, would guide us with a map. Our camp was in a remote location, far from civilization and any kind of cell phone signal. This meant we were completely isolated, which sounded exciting at the time, but soon became our worst nightmare. The campsite was near a small stream, surrounded by tall trees that blocked the view of the starry sky. We pitched our tents. When we all returned from our chores, we got down to work and began to prepare everything for the night. A few hours later, we had all the tents ready and a fire going, so we started cooking our rations. The night went on like any other camping trip, with laughter and jokes among friends. However, as the darkness closed in on us, we began to feel a strange uneasiness in the air. That's when we heard the sound of rustling branches in the distance. We all became alert, thinking it was a wild animal. The instructor said to wait and went to investigate. We all listened, and within seconds, someone was coming from his direction. But what emerged from the trees was not the instructor. Several men dressed in black, wearing masks that hid their faces, appeared out of nowhere. One of them held a camera, while the other carried some kind of rusty axe. The rest were carrying guns, and they were pointing them at us. We were paralyzed with fear and surprise. The intruders slowly approached us, staring at us through their masks. One of them spoke in a voice that sounded distorted and mechanical. They ordered us to get up and walk toward the stream. With no other choice, we obeyed, feeling like we were trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As we walked toward the creek, the intruders made us form a circle. They stared at us, their eyes hidden behind masks. Then the man with the axe began to speak in a voice that chilled our blood. He explained that we were a part of a macabre live show being broadcast on the deep web. We had been randomly chosen to be the victims of his twisted fun. Our hearts were pounding and anxiety gripped us. The man with the camera began to record us, pausing at each of our faces. We knew we were being filmed for an unknown audience in some dark corner of the web. Tears began to gather in our eyes, but we knew that crying would only make our situation worse. The deep web psychopath explained to us the rules of the macabre game we were about to play. Only one of us would make it out of that night alive, and the rest of us would disappear into the depths of the forest. The man placed a bottle in the middle of the ground and began to spin it to determine who would be the first to die. The bottle finished spinning and pointed to one of my friends. The intruders grabbed him and dragged him into the dark forest. I still remember my friend's screams. He was desperately calling for help, shouting that if we all got together, we could attack the men. Otherwise, we were all going to end up dying. You know, I still think about his words a lot. To tell you the truth, he was right. If we had listened to him, most of what happened that night could have been prevented. But can you blame us for not acting? We were only 18 years old. We had never had any real problems in our lives, and suddenly we were facing men from the deep web who wanted to play with us, torture us, and kill us. We could do nothing to stop them. We could only hear our friends' screams and terror fading in the distance. I admit that we all stared at each other. Some were thinking of attacking them. Others wanted to escape. But in reality, we were all frozen with fear. We were all convinced that there would surely be more people in the woods watching us, waiting for one of us to attack or try to escape. Hesitantly, we continued to listen to the sounds of our friends wailing, which would haunt us for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, the man with the axe looked at the rest of us and said that only one would escape. The rest would suffer the same fate. Time passed slowly and panic set in. We didn't know whether to try to flee or stay and wait for our turn to come. Finally, another bottle throw pointed to another one of my friends. They led him into the woods, and this time, we heard no screams. Just an eerie silence that left us even more terrified. As the night progressed, the intruders continued to pick off our friends one by one. Each time one of them disappeared, a sense of helplessness and despair grew in me. I knew that the possibility of being next was increasing, and my fear became unbearable. At one point in the night, none of us thought about escaping. The idea of being the last one alive started to become more and more attractive to all of us who were left. It was going to be harder and harder to resist or escape. We could only play by their rules. Without realizing it, we all became a herd of frightened sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Finally, there were only two of us left, my best friend Mark and me. The man with the axe looked at us with a sinister smile and informed us that it was now our turn to play. He gave us a choice. We could fight each other to the death, and the survivor would be free, or we could refuse and face an even worse fate. Mark and I looked at each other with terror in our eyes, knowing we had no choice. The fight was brutal and heartbreaking. We were not killers, we were friends. But the life at stake forced us to fight until one of us lay motionless on the ground. Blood mixed with mud, and the sound of our blows echoed in the night. Neither of us was really fighting. We were just two teenagers punching each other and crying. Every punch I hit Mark with was like hitting myself, and I could see in his eyes that the same thing was happening to him. You know, I've known Mark my whole life. He was the first guy I talked to on my first day of high school, and since then, we've always been inseparable friends. Mark was like a brother. A brother I was trying to beat to save my own life. If either of us had really wanted to take the other one down, we could have done it very easily. But all our blows were like content. We both wanted to survive, but neither of us could bring ourselves to drop everything. And the Axeman knew it. I could see in his face how he was getting impatient, and when the man with the camera spoke to him, he only got angrier. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see how the Axeman grimaced and prepared to come at us. I knew what this meant. The fight was boring him. In that moment of desperation, I stopped thinking about Mark and thought about my parents. I thought about how devastated they would be if anything happened to me. I thought about my father, who would blame himself for my death since he insisted that I come. At that moment, I closed my eyes and hit Mark as hard as I could while crying and closing my eyes. Mark was instantly defeated, and the man with the axe was surprised, but began to laugh. The man with the axe came up to me and congratulated me for surviving. He told me that I could leave. The man not only told me that I could tell the story, but he threatened that if I didn't tell the story, terrible things would happen to me and my family. So I was left to go, alone and traumatized in the middle of the dark forest. I ran without looking back, aimlessly, until I found a path that led me back to civilization. I arrived at a police station and told them what had happened. However, the police could find no trace of the deep web psychopaths or my missing friends. The deep web is a dark and mysterious place, difficult to trace. You know, sometimes I feel like I have to do something. Like look for them and get revenge for what happened to Mark. But inside, I know they are just fantasies. I have no choice but to live like a coward. A coward whose family is alive and plans to keep them that way. It was a bald, wrinkled, almost blue head. Its eyes were huge and white, and as it looked at me, it had a smile from ear to ear that chilled my blood. Have you ever done urban explorations? You see, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not interested in generating content from this, and I don't even want to become famous. I just enjoy getting into places where other people wouldn't go. To tell you the truth, I never believed in the paranormal, and that's not what I was looking for in these explorations. And that's why I can tell you this story, as I spent months thinking I had gone crazy. It all started on a camping day. I had planned to do an exploration of the forest. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was just going to spend the night in the woods. None of my friends could go, but I had no problem with that. It wasn't my first exploration alone, and it wasn't going to be my last one either. Or so I thought. I spent the whole day going deep into the heart of the forest. I didn't really know what I would find, but I knew that there were no animals too dangerous or anything like that, since I always investigated where I go. When I got deep enough into the forest, I noticed that it was starting to get dark. So I made my camp and set up camp in a part that I saw as fairly open and free of trees. I ate quickly and went to sleep when it was still quite early. As the sun was rising before 6 a.m., I wanted to get up early and with lots of energy. I closed my eyes slowly, and before I knew it, I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, I felt something was wrong. I'm not a deep sleeper, but I can sleep through the night if no one wakes me up. And that night, something woke me up. The night seemed normal and quiet, but something was wrong. Call it a feeling, experience, or whatever, but I knew someone was there. Looking out at the pasture in front of me, I watched as something moved unnaturally. The wind wasn't blowing and it didn't seem to be an animal. Someone was watching me. It's not the first time I've been in danger, but I've never encountered anything like this before. A stalker whose face or intentions I did not yet know was watching me. Faced with this discovery, I did the most logical thing I could think of. I grabbed my flashlight, a knife I had at my side, and went into the opposite direction to where the grass was moving. In that camp, I didn't have anything too expensive. I could go look for it the next day if there was anything left. In one swift move, I took off at high speed towards the pasture and started running as fast as I could. I didn't know exactly where we were, but I had a good idea of it. As I ran away, I could hear someone behind me chasing me, but the footsteps got lost little by little until they ended up disappearing. I walked a little more looking for a place to hide, and that's when it hit me. In front of me was an abandoned building under construction. It was strange for all the things outside. It looked like a hospital. But what was a hospital doing in the middle of nowhere? Why was it abandoned? Whatever the reason, it was a good hiding place from whoever was still walking near me. So I decided to go in and hide until I was sure this person wasn't following me anymore, or just that it would be daylight. Once inside, I realized that the place was fuller than I thought. Why would they leave a place like this half-built? I explored the abandoned hospital, trying to get as far into it as possible. I wasn't really afraid of what might be inside the hospital, but it was the man who was stalking me outside that really terrified me. Behind a closed double door, there were lights. How was this possible? How did the energy get here? Why was it coming? Where was I? I admit that curiosity got the better of me and I walked to the door. Once I opened it, I was met with a new surprise. Behind the closed door, there were no people. There were no guards, and they were not performing any experiments or anything I could expect. It was just a hallway with light. I walked a little inside this corridor, considering going into one of these doors to hide. If that person who was stalking me saw this place, he would surely think there were guards and would not want to enter. I walked in with a big smile, thinking that the worst had already happened and that surely this person could not do anything, when something in front of me made me stop in my tracks and fall to the floor with fright. One of the doors to the lighted corridor was open. Behind that door, there was no light, just gloom. Normally, this would not be the striking thing. The whole hospital except that room was dark. What really surprised me was that behind that terrifying door, someone was peeking out. For a moment, I thought it might have been a guard. It could also be my stalker or a simple homeless person who was living in the hospital. But no, this was something much worse. I will never forget how I felt when my eyes came face to face with whatever that was. It was a bald, wrinkled, almost blue head. Its eyes were huge and white, and as it looked at me, it had a smile from ear to ear that chilled my blood. I didn't know what this was, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. At that moment, the first thing you think of is to run. Run as fast as you can and leave it behind. Would you believe me if I told you that I didn't? In that situation, I was so scared that my body became totally paralyzed, falling to the floor in panic and possibly victim to whatever it was that was in front of me, looking at me very calmly. As if knowing that I could not move, that being came out the door and walked slowly down the hallway towards me. His body was tall, gangly, and skeletal. His bones seemed to be disproportionate and senseless, but he still walked towards me without any problems. What struck me most was the way he walked. I'm still terrified thinking about it. The steps of this being were irregular and difficult, as if it was suffering every step it took. It was strange. It was walking like any other person, but something about that walk seemed forced. It was as if that thing that was coming towards me was trying to walk, trying to be human. trying to make me think that I could be calm because I had another human in front of me. Seeing something so horrible filled my body with energy, and instead of using it to fight this being, I used it to run. I ran and ran and ran. I was so desperate that I didn't realize that I was still in an abandoned place. Since I entered, my life never stopped being in danger. Not by ghosts, psychopaths, or accusers, but by myself. As I was escaping from the being in that hallway, I fell down the escape hatches and ended up on the floor below. My body hurt a lot, and it was impossible for me to get up. But even so, I made every effort humanly possible to get out of that area. To keep going down the stairs and get out of there as soon as possible. But it was no use. Because of the blow I had at that moment, it was impossible for me to keep my concentration enough to keep from fainting. And so, as I closed my eyes and saw something or someone crawling near me, my eyes were much heavier than before. And when I closed my eyes, I fainted. When I woke up, it was already daylight. My body hurt a lot, and I still had the wounds from falling off the ladder. I went back to check the area that was lit, but now, not only was there no light coming from under the door, but the door was locked with chains. To tell the truth, it didn't bother me much either. Anyway, I had no plans to set foot in that area again. When I managed to escape, the first thing I did was to tell the police everything. Once I did, they all told me that what happened to me at the hospital was probably a lie, the results of my nerves being harassed. It could even be the development of a mental illness that made me hallucinate. Whatever it was, I was sure that what I saw there was real. What the police were able to discover was the information about the man who was following me. Apparently, he was an ex-convict who had escaped from prison. This man never planned to hurt me, but he surely would have if necessary. Luckily, the police caught him a few meters after he ran into me, as he just kept running in a straight line. I still wonder what happened that day. Honestly, the older I got, the blurrier the whole story became. Let this be a lesson. To remember, there are things beyond human understanding. Today, I'm afraid to go camping or to hospital. And I know that no one can judge me for it. The only thing I hope is that no other explorer ends up in that scary abandoned hospital again. Maybe I survived by being lucky, but who knows what that thing might do to the next person who walks in.
My name is Jacob Lane, and this is a detailed recollection of the horrifying events that went down on the 15th of August 2019 at Wendy's in Colorado. 3 months earlier, on the 20th of May, I applied for a job at my local Wendy's restaurant, as I needed a little money to help me with school. I got a job as a waiter and started working just 2 days later. Naturally, most of my co-workers were in their 20s, and it didn't take long for me to create a working bond with them, as well as a good relationship. A tradition I got introduced to at Wendy's was that as the newest employee, it was arranged for me to get the later shifts, which meant I often had to lock up late after everyone left. In weeks when I had tests or exams, however, they would let me get the earlier shifts so I could study. It also wasn't hard to arrange with someone else to take the late shifts if I wanted to go partying or hang out with other friends. Most of the time, though, I would end up working the late shifts, and it became a running joke for the co-workers to try and frighten me before leaving me alone in the restaurant. They would tell stories about how once in a while, the Wendy's girl would visit our restaurant in particular and stay for a while, as here's the only place she felt at home. They would say things like, "Jacob, tonight might be the night, huh? Maybe you'll get a visit from little Wendy herself." One day, I decided to ask where this rumor even started from. Alex, one of my co-workers, ended up telling me the origin of the story. "Well, none of us actually know if it's true. I mean, it obviously doesn't make any sense, but Julia, the manager, told me when she first got here, the former manager wouldn't shut up about it. Told her the whole thing about Wendy coming here once in a while and to make sure to treat her right. Julia was creeped out for a while, but It's never actually happened, so no need to worry. I'm sure you'll be fine. 2 days before I officially quit my job, I was given the late shift once again. I didn't have any problems, however, as I didn't have any plans for the night, and there wasn't much I had to do for school. That night was slow, and barely anyone came in before 9 p.m. Eventually, at around 9:30, a group of high schoolers came in all rowdy and wasted. Their orders were a lot for me to handle, and they were very impatient, rude, and annoying. By the time they left, it was already 11:15, and my mood had been completely ruined. I began to clean up their dishes, and once I was done with that, I started tidying up the restaurant, thinking about nothing but my home and bed. Eventually, I began finishing up, so I put my AirPods in as I prepared to leave for the day. I was standing at the counter, and out the corner of my eye, I noticed the door open, but I didn't see anyone come in. I quickly took out my AirPods as I was sure of what I'd seen. And that's when I heard tapping coming from across the counter. I looked over the counter and was met with the sight of a little girl standing alone in the restaurant. The girl had tiny brown eyes, freckles, and bright ginger hair that was held apart by blue ribbons. At first, I didn't realize the obvious similarities she had with the Wendy's girl, as despite her look not being what you saw every day, there wasn't anything particularly odd about the little girl's physical features. Now, the way she was dressed, however, was a completely different story, as that was what revealed to me her identical similarity to the Wendy's girl. Everything she wore was the colors blue and white, from the dress to the socks to the shoes. The girl stood silently, looking directly at me, and in that moment, all I could think about was how tired I was and how that night wasn't the night for the guys to pull a prank on me. I walked to the other side of the counter to meet the child and said, "Yeah, kid, this is a nice outfit and all, but I'm not really in the mood for jokes. You can go tell the guys to come out from wherever they're hiding." I had expected a somewhat childlike reaction from the girl, but she simply said nothing and proceeded to walk over to a table before taking a seat. I was still in a very bad mood, and the child's silence was only adding to my frustration, so I walked out the door into the parking lot and said, "Very funny, guys, but now's not the time for this." I waited for someone to come out, but the parking lot remained completely silent, and the only sounds I could hear were crickets. I walked back in to find the child seated with a menu. She looked up as I walked back in and finally spoke.
"I want one of everything on this menu. You can take your time."
At that point, I was completely frustrated and annoyed, but a part of me was confused as to how the little girl didn't act or sound her age in any way at all. Nothing about her had the childish innocence all kids her age showed. Instead, she gave off a mature and dark vibe. She was still a child, however, and I wasn't going to serve her anything, so I said, "First of all, young lady, we closed 15 minutes ago. And secondly, I don't care what you want, so please get up and go home." The girl looked shocked and responded calmly with,
"I am home."
The look in her eyes as she said that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't entertain the situation anymore, and I didn't know what it was about her, but I suddenly had goosebumps all over my body. The child sat still as she stared into my eyes, and at that moment, I realized it wasn't a joke, and I might lose my life if I didn't do what I was told. The girl looked away and finally broke the silence, saying,
"You shouldn't be rude to me in my home. You all need to learn to respect."
I walked away from her, completely confused as to how a child could make me frozen with fear. My mind immediately began to ponder the possibility of the jokes my coworkers told being true. All I knew was there was something very wrong with that child, and although I wasn't sure what it was, I knew it wouldn't be smart to stick around and find out. So I acted as if I was headed behind the counter, but I quickly burst out the front door and began running to the apartment complex down the street. As I ran away from Wendy's, all I could think of was, am I really running from a little girl? Those thoughts, however, were quickly justified as I heard a loud scream come from behind me, followed by rapid footsteps. I looked back to see Wendy running towards me at great speed with a large knife from our kitchen in hand. I kept running, but each time I looked back, she seemed closer and closer until eventually I felt a sharp pain through my leg, causing me to fall. The girl frantically crawled on top of me, stabbing my arm, legs, and shoulder, grunting heavily in the process. She eventually crawled up to face me. Her eyes remained still, dead, empty, and my blood had covered most of her freckles. The girl gripped my neck before saying, "You shouldn't be rude to me in my home. You all need to learn respect." She raised the knife to stab me again, but the headlights of a car pulling out of the apartment complex lit up the road I was lying on, and the driver screamed as soon as she saw what was happening. Before the driver could get out of the car to help, Wendy got off me and ran, straight into the darkness, disappearing just as quickly as she had appeared. The police and my boss arrived with the paramedics later that night, and after I told them my story, they came up with two possible conclusions. The first being that I was high on drugs and got into a fight with someone, and the second being that there was a crazy individual probably suffering from a type of dwarfism and skeletal dysplasia called SED, a bone growth disorder resulting in skeletal abnormalities that allowed her to pose as a child and carry out her crazy and twisted fantasy as the Wendy's girl. The cops explained this had happened before in the case of Barbara Skrlova, who posed as a 12-year-old girl named Annika in the Czech Republic. The woman who stopped to help corroborated my story and confirmed she also saw the little girl who was attacking me before running away. Her statement and the drug test I was given led the police to decide it was probably the second theory and put out a search warrant for the woman. I quit my job 2 days later, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself the police theory was right, I've always known, deep down, there was nothing normal about the eyes of the Wendy's girl I saw that night. Over the years, after hearing numerous horror cases and stories, I've come to realize there is also nothing normal about everyone's favorite fast food restaurant, Wendy's. This case is loosely based on the story of John Stugart, a Wendy's employee in the early 80s, who claimed to have had an encounter with the popular Wendy's mascot herself. The employee claimed that the child visited him late at night while working alone and attacked him when he tried attending to her. After further investigation, however, it was decided the employee was mentally unstable and he was put in a psychiatric hospital just 3 months later. Most records of this case were quickly discarded, which led many people, including myself, to ask the question, was he really mad, or was there something bigger going on? What could have been the truth about the night Stugart spent alone at Wendy's? And what could be the secret our favorite restaurant, Wendy, doesn't want us finding out? For the last year, I've been a regular viewer of this channel, and let me tell you how happy I get when a new video pops up in my notification. I know a lot of you can relate to this. Being a truck driver, most of the time I'm on the road. These videos and music keep me entertained throughout my drives. But today, I'm going to share a true night driving horror story with you, and I hope you enjoy it. My name is Stefan, and for the past 8 years I've been a truck driver. I always enjoyed driving and being on the road, so when I was approached by my uncle to work as a driver in his transportation company, I jumped at the opportunity. I'm also a part of the truck driving community, and we all share our good as well as bad or terrifying experiences with each other. I too had seen my fair share of sketchy and illegal things on the road, but what happened to me that one time made me question everything. The company that I work for transports electronic goods, furniture, and other non-perishable items most of the time. There was one such delivery I had to do from South Carolina to North Dakota. It was December, so the atmosphere was already chilly, and driving through snow-covered roads is not my favorite part. However, I was requested to make this delivery by my uncle, as the other driver had taken sick leave. I reluctantly accepted to drive the goods, on one condition: that I would drive slowly and take my time delivering them. My uncle happily agreed, as the company was soon to be closing for Christmas. In my truckers community, I have a lot of drivers that had mentioned weird things happening on the way to North Dakota. Although I listened to all of them, I never really believed in the supernatural or the paranormal. I always thought those things were a result of your mind playing tricks on you. Not to mention the road life can be extremely lonely at times. On my third day of the drive, there was a snowstorm warning. I was just on the outskirts of North Dakota and had to call it a day. I always avoid driving in rough weather. Better to be late than dead. But this snowstorm was a hell of a lot worse than the ones I'd dealt with before. I'd planned to find truck parking and spend my time there, but the weather didn't permit me to go any further than a couple of miles. Finally defeated and tired of making my way through the snow-covered roads, I parked in a small clearing by the freeway. There was no chance I was getting out of the truck. Also, the sun was about to set, so I knew it would be pitch black soon. I did my regular drill, checked the back doors of the trailer and make sure everything was locked up, made sure all the tires weren't covered in snow, and locked the driver's and passenger side door, boarded up the front glass with a blackout curtain that I carry with me, and I shut the windows. I knew I had to keep the heating on in my truck if I wanted to sleep comfortably, plus I had to make dinner. By the time it was dark outside, I had eaten my dinner, a simple sandwich, relieved myself, and was ready to get some shut-eye. I lay in the makeshift bed behind the driver's and passenger seat, pulled a blanket over myself, and got comfortable. I knew it'd take a few minutes to fall asleep, so I decided to watch some of SSG Animation's scary videos on YouTube. I'm not sure when I fell asleep, but I jolted awake after hearing a sudden bang. It was as if someone had hit something hard and big against the rear of my truck. My phone was beside my bed and it was dark, inside and out. My first instinct was that maybe I'd had a dream, so I decided to go back to sleep, only to be woken up by another bang a couple minutes later. This time, however, I knew I wasn't dreaming. Someone or something was banging on my truck, and they were hitting hard against the steel. I had a couple of incidents of homeless people or straight-up thieves trying to steal stuff from my parked truck. But who would get here in the middle of the snowstorm with 2 or 3 feet of snow everywhere? Bang! Once again. Who the hell was it? I knew it was intentional, as no wild animal ever targets a big object repeatedly, and never in a snowstorm. But who would be daring enough to get out here in such a remote place and at that ungodly hour just to torment a truck driver? If it weren't snowing so much, I'd step out and confront the person or people. I always carried a small gun with me, just in case. So I wasn't afraid. But this time, something in my gut told me to stay inside and not react. However, I was curious, so I decided to film whatever was going on through my window. With my phone camera, I moved over from my bed to get closer to the window. As soon as I pointed my camera towards the exterior of the truck, I saw weird yellow eyes staring straight at me from the corner of my window. I was so scared that I stumbled back into my bed. I didn't make a single sound, as the only thing keeping me safe from the creature outside was the truck door and some breakable glass. I knew as soon as I saw the eye that this was no wolf or bear, nor was this any human or any animal for that matter. It was something else, something we didn't know about. I stayed tucked in my bed and kept recording as much as I could. Soon I spotted an ear of the creature, all while the banging continued. This meant there was more than one of these creatures. I knew I didn't stand a chance in front of one of these guys, not even with my gun, so the wise thing was to lay low and hope they'd leave me alone. Also, the battery of my phone was about to die, so I stopped recording and curled myself back in bed. Now the creatures were moving to the front of the truck, and I was terrified. I knew the only one who could save my life from the terrifying creatures outside was God. So I started praying while I hid beneath my blanket. The creatures banged on the doors and the hood of the truck. They were trying to open the doors to get in, but I had double locked them. A locking technique I'd learned very early on in my trucking career. Now, without my phone, I wasn't able to see anything outside. All I could do was hear the noises made by these creatures. This went on for at least an hour, after which the creatures got bored of my truck and left. That night, I didn't sleep one bit. I was wide awake in case the creatures returned, but they never did. The next morning after sunrise, I scouted the surroundings from the inside of my truck, and when I thought the coast was clear, I jumped out of the truck. I jumped straight into 4 feet of snow. There were no footprints on the ground for me to figure out if it was a human or an animal. However, as I moved towards the back of the truck, there were multiple dents in the steel, which resembled a powerful punch. Not scratched from an animal's paw or horns, but a human punch. Who would be strong enough to put such deep dents into a steel truck? I had no idea, but I decided to get the hell out of that place as soon as I could. Finally, I reached my destination by midday, and fortunately, the snow on the road had melted and the weather was pleasant. The people unloading the stuff from my truck had asked if I'd gotten into an accident, looking at all the dents on it. I told them what had happened, and they told me that no one dares to travel on that part of the freeway after sunset, and the people living in that region believe that a half-human, half-animal hybrid roams that area after sundown and attacks anything and anyone who comes across it. To date, no one has been able to catch or even get a photo of this animal, as it's as smart as a human and as strong as an animal. Then, I showed the footage on my phone, and perhaps that was the only time someone had captured those creatures on camera. I don't know if I should consider myself lucky or extremely lucky. What do you think those things were? Werewolves? Humanoids? Or aliens? I, for one, have no clue what they were, and nor do I ever want to know.
I was alone in McDonald's one night, as usual, closing up shop after a long shift. It was a cold, rainy night, and the atmosphere at the restaurant was eerie. My coworkers had already finished their work and left, leaving me alone to take care of the final cleaning and closing tasks. The place was silent, with only the sounds of the rain pattering against the glass and the hum of the fluorescent lights. As I went about my chores, I began to feel a strange sensation, as if someone was watching me. As I was cleaning the tables and picking up the trash, I noticed that one of the chairs was slightly pushed out of its usual place. I went over to adjust it, thinking that someone might have moved it before leaving, but I didn't see anyone in the restaurant. As I finished picking up the trash in the table area, something else strange caught my eye. The cash register was open. I remember closing it after the last customer paid for his order. I cautiously approached it and closed it again, wondering if I had forgotten to do so. The feeling of being watched continued to grow, and now I felt more uncomfortable than ever. As I headed toward the kitchen to finish cleaning the fryer, I heard a noise coming from the bathroom area. I walked over and saw that the men's room door was opening and closing on its own, as if someone was inside. I froze for a moment, not knowing how to react. Could there be someone inside? Would there be anyone else in the restaurant besides me? With slow, fearful steps, I approached the bathroom door and carefully pushed it open. To my surprise, it was empty. There was no one there. The feeling that something strange was going on became more intense. I decided to quickly finish the cleaning and close the McDonald's. I headed to the kitchen, and as I was tending to the fryer, I felt an intense cold all around me. I looked toward the window and saw a blurry figure standing next to the soda machine. The figure was fuzzy, as if composed of shadows. I couldn't make out facial features, but I could feel its presence. My heart was pounding as I faced this terrifying sight. I decided to remain calm and not let fear overpower me. Surely there was an explanation for this. wasn't there? At that moment, I thought that none of this could be real. That day I was particularly tired. I had slept very little, and maybe I was still very suggestible from the horror movies I had seen the day before. I told myself that what had happened with the chairs and the cash register was just coincidence, and that surely the bathroom door was just the wind. All of that had been a suggestion, and surely now it was just my head playing tricks on me. In denial, but absolutely terrified, I finished cleaning the fryer, but the figure was still there, motionless. The atmosphere was filled with negative and hostile energy. I felt the air was tighter than ever, and I began to breathe with more and more difficulty. Confused, I looked back in the direction of the shadow, but something had changed. She was no longer there. At that moment, my heart almost stopped when I realized that the reason the shadow was no longer in that position was because it was next to me. It had no face or features. It was as if a shadow had taken on a corporeal state. It said nothing, but its mere presence communicated to me that I was not welcome. I felt trapped and frightened, not knowing what to do. I backed slowly toward the fryer, not taking my eyes off the figure. It was then that the entity began to move, approaching me slowly and intimidatingly. Every step I took filled me with terror. I tried to run away, but in a blink of an eye, I was in front of the fryer. Before I could react, my body began to move only towards the fryer, which was suddenly on, and even though I had pulled it out, it was full of oil. I struggled with all my might to avoid falling into it, but my head was getting closer and closer. By forcing myself, I could stop it temporarily, but still, with each passing second, I was closer to it. I could feel the drops of oil jumping towards my face, and the heat of the oil began to irritate my skin. The pain was unbearable, and I knew that if I gave in, my life would be in danger. I used all the strength I had in me, and with one last effort, managed to free myself from the entity. I fell to the ground, my skin reddened and burned by the heat of the fryer. I crawled from the fryer, feeling an intense pain on my skin. The shadowy entity was still there, watching me. My hands were shaking as I tried to get up, but my body was weakened by the effort and fear. Once outside, I thought the cold rain and wind would make my face stop hurting, but the opposite was true. My face burnt so much, it was as if the oil was still on it, burning me more and more. I walked away from the restaurant and sought refuge in my car, where I felt a little safer. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down as I felt the burning of the burns on my face and hands. At that moment, I had the impression that if whatever the shadow was had wanted to kill me, it would have simply done it. I couldn't help but feel tiny, like I had encountered something far beyond my understanding, and the only reason I survived was by a quirk of fate. I decided not to return to the restaurant that night. Instead, I called the manager to explain what had happened and asked him to check the security cameras. At first, he thought it was a joke. Then he thought I was drunk. As I started the car, I looked into the restaurant through the windshield and saw that the entity was still there, standing at the emergency door staring at me. A few minutes later, the manager told me that the police had already gone to the area and found no one. He himself was in charge of closing the restaurant with the police nearby, and he didn't see anything either. When he heard me panic, he told me that the next day we should see the recordings and that today I would just rest. The next day, we both went to McDonald's and reviewed the security footage. My manager found out that everything I had told him was true. On the recording, we could see how I was struggling against myself to keep my head out of the oil, while a shadow was standing in front of me. There was no logical explanation for its origin or nature, but the manager confessed to me that other employees had warned him that they had seen a strange figure during the night. He naturally never believed the stories and thought it was an inside joke the night shift employees had on him. At that moment, he realized that everything he had been told was true. The figure seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. It simply appeared, until in a moment, out of nowhere, it disappeared again. The entity had completely disappeared. There was no sign of its presence, no footprints or traces. It was as if it had never been there. As I left the McDonald's, the manager told me to get urgent treatment for what happened to my face, because even after hours, it was still burning. and the few creams I had used at home had not worked. That was my last day working at McDonald's, and shortly after, I found out that it was closed for a few months. Part of me was relieved that something like that wouldn't happen to anyone else. But this didn't last long. A few months later, the restaurant reopened and life went on. A few times I went with my friends to eat, and sometimes I would see the same manager walking the aisles of the place. Every time the manager saw me at the tables, he would just look away. Possibly it was an embarrassment, as both he and I knew that another innocent employee would close the McDonald's on the night shift and was a potential victim of that entity, and he would do nothing to stop it. Now that Halloween is around the corner, I thought about sharing an incident that happened in the cul-de-sac community where I live. I'm Sabrina, and this story is based on a true incident. Last June, I married Ashton. We met on a dating app and things quickly progressed from there. When we got married, Ashton moved us into a house he had purchased a few years ago. The house was a pretty cozy home, something I had pictured myself living in. It was the fourth house in a cul-de-sac of 6 homes. In our area, there was a community of cul-de-sac homes. It was a safe neighborhood and I was very pleased to live there. Within a few months of our marriage, we became pregnant with our baby boy Max. In one of the other 5 houses in our cul-de-sac lived an old couple, and then the rest of the other 4 homes were occupied by small families like us. My favorite part of living in the cul-de-sac home was the little kids that played in our common circular driveway. Every time I tended to my front garden, I used to see these kids play together. Slowly, I became friends with them, and sometimes their parents used to ask me to keep an eye on the kids while they worked at home or ran errands. The oldest among them was Philip Martin, 10 years old, and then there was his little brother, Andy Martin, 8 years old. Then there was Gemma Chang, 9-year-old Asian girl. Then there was Bob Anderson, 8, who was in the same grade as Andy, and lastly, 9-year-old Jim Flenderson. All these kids were very close and also went to the same school. As it was my first Halloween there, and also because I was pregnant, I could not decorate the house as I wished to. The kids noticed the lack of decoration in our home and brought all the spare Halloween decorations they had and helped me decorate my house. By then, I felt like I was part of the cul-de-sac family. Unfortunately, Ashton, my husband, had to fly out of state for work, and so I was left alone in the house. I had brought some candy from the store earlier for all the kids who came trick-or-treating. I knew at some point these 5 little devils would come to my home asking for treats. Around 6 in the evening, my doorbell started ringing with all the kids coming for their share of candy. Although it was a delight seeing kids dressed as different characters or things, I was wondering who or what had my 5 little neighbors become for this Halloween. As I remember, they were hell-bent on wearing coordinated outfits. An hour or so later, my bell rang and in front of my door were 5 kids dressed as a big bear, a bird, a rabbit, a kid, and a fox. And they all looked scary as their costumes were definitely not as cute as they were. What are you all supposed to be? We are characters from a video game called Five Nights at Freddy's, which we all love to play very much. We are Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and BB. Andy replied to me, who was dressed as the creepy fox. Their costumes resembled animatronics. You all look very scary. I complimented them with a smile and handed each one of them their share of candy. Now, after spending so much time with these kids, I knew them pretty well. Their body language, the way they spoke and interacted with one another. When I looked at all the kids again, I could easily make out who was hidden under which costumes. However, when Gemma walked up to me to get her candy, I noticed a slight difference in her behavior. I knew the girl was shy and talked only when spoken to. She was also very polite, as her dad had taught her good manners. When I dropped the candy in her basket, Gemma turned away and started walking behind the rest of the gang. That's when I was confident something was wrong. So I called after her. Hey Gemma, how you doing? Did you all go to all the houses in our area? Instead of replying immediately, as the little girl always did to me, she slowly turned around, nodded her head, and then ran behind the rest of the kids who had already reached the house of the old couple. I stood there on my porch watching Gemma. Suddenly, she appeared a little taller than usual. But kids grow fast, don't they? But the thing that bothered me the most was the fact that she had not said thank you to me when I gave her the candy. Gemma usually bowed and said thank you to anyone who gave her anything. It was an Asian thing her father had taught to her. Also, as she did not have a mother, she had become pretty close to me, as I was the closest thing to a mother the poor girl had. As I kept on observing Gemma, I noticed that she wasn't talking to her 4 best friends too. The 4 boys were chatting, joking, but for some reason, she wasn't part of the fun that night. Apart from me, the 4 boys and their families were the only people Gemma opened herself to. After a few minutes, the kids had collected candy from all the homes in our cul-de-sac and had walked to the other one. That's when I looked at Gemma's house in which she lived with her dad. There on the top floor in her dad's bedroom was a silhouette of a man who quickly got away from the window as soon as I spotted him. He was at least 6 feet tall, which meant it wasn't Gemma's dad, who was around 5'4". Totally forgetting that I was pregnant, I went to Gemma's front porch and rang the doorbell. But no one opened the door. Something fishy was going on, and I knew deep down that the kids were unsafe. So I decided to call Mr. Chang. He picked up soon after the 3rd ring. I asked him where he was, who was in her house, and most importantly, what was going on with Gemma. He was a bit surprised by my line of questions and said that last night around 12:30, he had received a call that Gemma's grandma was ill, so he and Gemma drove to Wyoming to be with her grandma. So there was no one in the house, and in fact, Gemma was with him reading stories to her sick granny. This shook me to my core, and without thinking much, I called 911 and told them what had happened. But I knew the kids weren't safe. So instead of calling their parents, I ran towards them with my big pregnant belly and all. I yelled out to the boys, but none of them replied. Somehow, after asking a few passerbys if they had seen 5 kids wearing weird animatronic costumes, I found them in the local park, which was pitch dark so late in the evening. I yelled out to the boys again, but still no reply. Then I heard an ear-piercing scream and ran in the direction. There, behind the big bush, were all 4 boys. The heads of their costumes lay at a distance, and in front of them, with a gun and a big knife in hand, was a short man around 4'9" in height. He was dressed as a bird, the character who I thought was Gemma. He was holding the boys at gunpoint and had cut Andy in his leg. When he spotted me, he aimed the gun straight at my stomach. "Hey, please stop. Let the kids go, I beg you." He didn't say a word, just laughed out loud and fired the gun in the air. I and the kids instinctively covered our ears, and the man kept laughing like a maniac. While the man was fully focused on me and pointing the gun at my belly, I saw Philip, the eldest, get up and sneak behind the man with a large wooden plank he had found close by. I kept talking to the kidnapper and distracted him while Philip swung the plank on the man's head. Before the man could understand what was happening, he was on the ground, unconscious. But the gun fired and the bullet hit me in the shoulder. I still managed to walk to the unconscious man and pick up his gun. The kids had all huddled around me by then, gasping and crying, looking at all the blood. The cops soon got there after hearing 2 gunshots, and they had already arrested the tall man in Gemma's home. They arrested the unconscious kidnapper too. What had happened was, when Gemma and her father left early in the morning, these 2 thugs had seen them leave. They broke into their home and found Gemma's Chick the Bird costume. They planned on abducting the kids and then selling them to human traffickers. However, they did not expect me to stop in and save the kids. I'm just glad that I was able to save the children. But now that I think about it, do I want to raise my little Sam in such an unsafe environment? Hello, everyone. We are thrilled that you have been enjoying our videos. Your support means the world to us. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. We would love to hear which one of our videos is your favorite. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 members in the SSG family, and with your help, we can achieve that goal. Thank you for being a part of our journey. I paid for a private meeting with an OnlyFans model, and less than 1 hour later, I was tied to a chair while 3 men forced me to empty every crypto wallet I owned. Every step had been prepared in advance, and I walked straight into it without noticing. If you think this kind of thing only happens to careless people, then you are already thinking the same way I was before it happened. I worked as a crypto trader, and most of my life happens inside my apartment. I was making good money. I was careful with my accounts, and I thought that was enough to stay safe. OnlyFans started as a distraction with the routine. Most profiles felt fake or distant, but then I found one that felt direct and consistent. And that difference made me stay longer than I planned. She remembered the details, responded fast, and kept conversations. That trust is what made everything possible, and the moment I accepted her offer, the situation turned into something designed around me. One night, she sent me a message that was different from everything before. She explained that she offered a VIP experience for select clients, and that it included private sessions, direct contact, and the option to meet in person under strict conditions. She made it sound exclusive enough that saying no felt like missing something. I took time to think about it, but I had been talking to her long enough to feel like I understood her, and that false sense of familiarity made the situation feel safer than it was. When I finally agreed, she sent me the address and a list of instructions that I followed without questioning. The building looked completely normal, which made it easier to believe everything was fine. I checked the address twice before going in, and everything matched, so I walked to the apartment and stopped at the door for a moment before knocking. That pause mattered more than I realized, because it was the last moment where I could have left without consequences. She opened the door quickly and greeted me in the same tone she used online, and that consistency lowered my guard again. Inside, the apartment looked clean but empty, with almost no personal items. We talked for a while. The conversation shifted slowly, and she suggested turning things into a controlled scenario where she would take the lead, explaining it as something she had done before. And I agreed, even though I understood I was giving up control in a place I did not know. That decision is what made everything that followed possible. Before anything started, I noticed how quiet the apartment had become, and I realized I could not hear anything from outside or from other units, which made the space feel isolated. That silence stayed in the background while she moved around the room, preparing everything. She asked me to sit on the bed and relax, and I followed her instructions because I still believed I was choosing to be there. She tied my wrists with firm knots and secured my ankles the same way, leaving just enough movement to feel controlled but not enough to escape. I tested the restraint slightly, and she told me to stop moving and trust her. And I did, even though something felt off. After that, she placed a blindfold over my eyes, and the loss of vision forced me to rely entirely on sound. I could hear her walking around adjusting something, and moving from one side of the room to the other, and at first, everything felt like part of the situation. I stayed still and waited. Time passed without any contact, and the silence stretched longer than expected, which made me question what was happening. I called her name in a controlled tone, expecting a quick response, but there was nothing, and that absence changed everything. I called again, louder this time, but the silence did not break, and that is when the situation stopped feeling like a setup and started feeling like a mistake. I stayed still for a few seconds, trying to focus on any sound that could explain what was happening, but I could not hear her anywhere in the room. I pulled against the restraints with more force, testing if I could free myself, but the knots held and tightened against my skin. I raised my voice and called her again, but there was no answer. And at that point, I knew she was not coming back. The tension kept building while I was waiting for any sounds that could explain what was happening outside. When it finally opened, the impact against the wall made it clear that whoever entered did not care about being quiet. I heard multiple footsteps moving quickly toward me, and the weight of those steps made it clear there was more than one person. Hands gripped me without hesitation, and the force they used made it clear this was not confusion or a misunderstanding. One person held my chest down while another forced my arms back, increasing the pressure on my shoulders in a way that caused immediate pain. I tried to push back, but the position I was in made it useless, and every movement only made them tighten their grip. They dragged me off the bed and forced me to stand even though I could not balance properly, and I struggled to stay upright while they moved across the room. I had no way to predict where they were taking me, which made it harder to react. At that point, the situation had fully shifted. They forced me into a chair in another room, and when they removed the blindfold, I saw 3 men standing around me, all with their faces covered. I looked around quickly for her, but she was not there, and that confirmed she had been part of this from the beginning. That realization hit harder than anything else. Everything had been planned around me. Before anything else happened, one of them stepped forward and asked about my crypto accounts in a direct tone without wasting time on anything else. I tried to answer in a way that it would give me time, but the moment I slowed down, the first hit came hard enough to break my focus. They brought my phone and forced me to unlock it. And I did it because I understood that resisting would only make things worse. As I opened each wallet and account, one of them recorded the process while another watched closely to make sure I followed every instruction. I hesitated once, trying to think of a way to stop what was happening. But that hesitation was answered immediately, and I understood there was no space to delay. Every transfer was done under their supervision, and I watched the balances drop to zero while they moved from one account to another without stopping. The process was fast and organized, and it felt like something they had done many times before. By the end, everything was gone, and I was still tied to a chair with no control over what would happen next. After the transfers, they forced me to delete every app and account connected to my crypto activity, making sure nothing remained that could be used later. I followed every step because I had no other option, and they checked everything carefully once I finished. The situation slowed down for a moment, and they stepped back slightly as if deciding what to do next. I stayed completely still while they exchanged short comments between themselves. One of them decided I was not worth keeping, and the others agreed without hesitation, which made it clear how little control I had left. The next moment came fast, and the impact to my head ended everything. I woke up outside a building I did not recognize with my hands partially tied and my phone next to me. It took time to understand where I was and what had happened, and when I checked the phone, everything was gone, including every app and account I had used for years. The money was already out of reach. I reported everything, but I already knew how it would go, because operations like this are planned to leave almost nothing behind. Her profile disappeared within days, until the justice was finally made.
An OnlyFans content creator was allegedly involved in a setup that led to a violent robbery targeting a crypto trader who was attacked for around $150,000 in digital assets. According to reports, 4 suspects tracked and ambushed the victim. They beat and threatened him until he gave them access to his crypto wallets. The attackers acted in a coordinated way, suggesting prior planning and inside information.
If you ever think you really know the person you live with, watch what happens when they stop looking at you the way they used to, because that is where everything starts to fall apart. Mara and I had been living together for 2 years. There was a time when that felt enough for both of us without needing anything else. But that changed slowly in ways that were easy to ignore at first. She started smiling more, but not with me. And she spent more time on her phone, reacting to things I couldn't see while I sat next to her waiting for her attention. The moment that stayed with me happened one night when I stood in front of her, trying to talk, and she kept looking at her screen with that same smile, completely unaware that I was there. I didn't say anything, but something in me understood that I was already being replaced by something I didn't fully understand yet. That night she told me about her account. She'd been using the platform for a while now because her self-esteem was really low and her life lacked excitement. But now she feels desires and truly feels good for the first time in years. Hearing her say that broke my heart. I couldn't believe it. About OnlyFans, she said she wasn't asking for permission and that I needed to respect her decision even if I didn't like it. After that, Her mood improved in a way that didn't include me, and that contrast made everything worse. She laughed more, dressed differently, and moved with confidence, but she spent less time with me, and it felt like her real life had moved somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow. And that was the point where I made a decision that I told myself I wouldn't regret, even though I already knew I would. I told myself I wouldn't look at her profile, but that decision didn't last, because the curiosity turned into something stronger that didn't let me focus on anything else. One night, while she was asleep next to me, I searched for her account and found it in seconds, and I stayed there staring at her profile longer than I expected. When I finally paid for the subscription and opened the first video, I felt something shift inside me, because the way she looked at the camera was not something I had ever seen before. It wasn't just how she looked. It was how intentional everything felt, like she was giving something away that I didn't have access to anymore. After that, I started checking her account every day, watching every video and reading every comment. And the more I saw, the worse I felt, but I still couldn't stop. I created a fake account and started interacting with her, asking for things that reminded me of what we used to have. And when she responded once, it was enough to keep me hooked. "What do you want exactly?" I stared at that message for a long time before answering, trying to find something that didn't sound desperate. Something real, not just for everyone. She liked the message, and that small reaction felt bigger than it should have, because it gave me the illusion that I was still reaching her somehow. And that illusion is what kept me going, even when everything inside me was telling me to stop. I kept talking to her for weeks. It was my way of getting closer to her again. But one night, everything changed. Hours passed without any message from her. I walked around the apartment without doing anything specific, checking my phone again and again, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. At some point, I stopped moving and just stared at my phone, waiting for something to happen, and that was when the notification appeared. It came from the fake account, and it said she uploaded a new video. And for a moment, I hesitated because something about the timing didn't make sense. I opened the video slowly, expecting something normal. But the moment it started, I understood that this was different. She was sitting on a chair with her hands tied behind her back and her legs secured, and there was something in her mouth stopping her from speaking clearly, while she looked directly at the camera with clear fear in her eyes. And that was the moment where I realized I wasn't watching content anymore. Before anything else happened, she tried to move the chair and failed. And the sound of it scraping against the floor made everything feel real in a way I couldn't ignore. She kept shaking her head and making muffled sounds, and I leaned closer to the screen trying to understand if this was staged or something else entirely. The man stepped into the frame, moving in a calm and controlled way that made everything worse, because he didn't need to rush or exaggerate anything. He stood next to her and placed his hands on her shoulder, and when she tried to pull away, he held her in place without effort. "You ignored me when I asked you directly. You thought this would stay online and never reach you. You gave everyone something except me." His voice sounded distorted, but there was emotion behind it, something personal that made it harder to listen to. He grabbed her hair and forced her to face the camera, and she started crying harder while trying to speak through the gag, moving her body in short attempts to break free. He took a knife from his pocket and held it close to her neck while continuing to speak in a tone that felt controlled but intense. "If I don't get what I want, then nobody gets anything. This ends here, and everyone watching will remember it." He pressed the blade against her neck and dragged it across slowly, and the sound that followed made everything feel immediate and real. Her body reacted in short movements, and her eyes stayed open while the focus in them faded. And I watched that change happen without being able to look away. My beautiful woman, the love of my life, was gone forever. I left the apartment and went straight to the police, trying to explain what I had seen while showing them the video, but my words didn't come out clearly. They asked me to sit down while they checked things, and I stayed there trying to process what had just happened. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in my bed the following morning, and that didn't match what I thought had happened. When I got up, I went to the laundry and I found clothes covered in blood. Before I can process it, the doorbell rang. And when I opened the door, the police were there again, but this time Their tone was different. They asked me to come with them and at the station. And that's when I realized what was happening. I remembered the part I wish I could forget. It was me all along. I became obsessed with his attention, and everything became distorted. The last thing I remember is when she looked directly at me for a second, and even without seeing my face, she understood exactly who was behind the mask. All I can say is, I'm sorry. Today I'm serving my sentence. I was arrested for manslaughter and diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I'm undergoing treatment, but it's nothing more than endless torture. Remembering every day how I lost you, Maria. Mercedes Moore was murdered in her home by a man who had become fixated on her online presence. The attacker broke into her residence, killed her, and then took his own life. This case highlights how digital exposure can sometimes attract dangerous individuals, turning admiration into violent obsession. What you're about to hear is how my career and my life were ruined in a matter of seconds. It was a lot of money. The client paid me $11,000 for a fetish session, where I took him to the extreme while everything was recorded. I built my entire life around saying yes more often than other people, and that made me successful in a way that felt stable at the time. I had rules, or at least I thought I did, and I believed I could manage any situation as long as I stayed calm and controlled the environment. That brief moment made me accept things I shouldn't have accepted, and it made me ignore warning signs that were obvious once everything was over. He didn't start with requests, which is what made him stand out immediately, because most clients want attention the moment they pay. He sent large amounts of money without saying anything, and at first I thought it was just someone trying to get noticed in a different way. That went on for weeks, and every time I saw his name, I knew another payment was coming, which slowly made me stop questioning it. Instead of being careful, I got used to it, and that's where things started going wrong. When he finally sent a message, it was simple and direct, asking for a private session with no limits, and I remember reading it again because something about it didn't feel like a normal request. I tried to push him away by setting a price that usually ended conversations, but he agreed immediately and paid everything up front. That changed the situation completely, because now I wasn't just considering the idea, I had already accepted it. Before agreeing to anything, there was a moment where I thought about blocking him and refunding the money, because I didn't like how quiet he had been. That thought didn't last long because I started thinking about how much I would lose. He told me he wanted it live and in person, and I convinced myself I could handle it as long as I controlled the setup, which is the same thing I had told myself before every bad decision I made. When he walked into my apartment, the first thing I noticed was how little he reacted to anything around him. I kept talking while setting up the camera and lights, explaining things that didn't need explanation. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, and didn't engage with anything I said, which made every second feel longer than it should have. Once the stream started, viewers joined quickly, and that pressure made it harder to stop, even if I wanted to. At first he gave instructions in a calm voice, and I followed them while trying to keep things within limits that I knew were safe. The problem was that he didn't react to anything, not to me, not to the situation, and that made it harder to understand what he actually wanted. Before things escalated, there was a long moment where he just stood there without moving, and I asked if everything was okay. He answered briefly without emotion and told me to continue, which forced me to keep going without clarity. That's when I started to feel actual fear because I realized I was the only one making decisions in a situation I didn't fully understand. The shift into something dangerous didn't happen suddenly. It built slowly through smaller changes that made everything harder to control. He asked for tighter restraints and less room for adjustment, and I followed those instructions while trying to keep things manageable. The problem was that every step made it harder to fix anything if something went wrong, and I knew that while I was doing it. Before the next request, there was a long silence where I looked at the camera, then at him, trying to decide if I should stop the session. The chat was active, the money was still coming in, and everything looked controlled from the outside, which made it harder to justify ending it. I hesitated, but I didn't act, and that hesitation is something I still think about. When he asked for the plastic on his head, I didn't respond immediately, and he noticed that pause in a way that made the situation feel more tense. I tried to shift the session into something safer, but he reminded me of the agreement in a calm voice that didn't leave room for negotiation. And that's when he threatened to reveal a deeply personal secret from my teenage years that would destroy my entire empire. At that moment, I knew there was no way out, so I did everything in my power to make sure that man didn't say a single word. So I decided to go ahead with the customer's request. The moment everything went wrong didn't come with a clear signal. It happened in a way that forced me to notice something was off before I understood it completely. I realized he had stopped responding, and at first, I thought it was intentional because of the context. I called out to him, expecting an answer, but nothing came back, and that silence felt different from before. Before reacting, I hesitated for a moment, trying to convince myself it was still under control, because accepting the truth meant everything had already gone too far. I moved closer and called again, louder this time, but there was still nothing. That's when the situation stopped feeling manageable. I started removing the plastic quickly, but it was harder than I expected, and my hands kept slipping while I tried to pull it apart. I wasn't thinking about the stream anymore. I was focused on getting a response. When I finally cleared his face, the lack of movement was immediate and obvious. Before checking his breathing, I paused for a second because I already knew what I was about to confirm. I checked anyway, and when I realized there was nothing, I tried to fix it without knowing if I was doing it right. I kept trying because stopping meant accepting what had happened. After that, everything felt automatic, like I was moving without thinking because processing it felt impossible. I turned off the stream, called for help, and tried to explain what happened even though my thoughts were disorganized. My voice sounded different, and I had to repeat things because I couldn't focus properly. Before anyone arrived, there was a stretch of time where I was alone in the room, and somehow I felt a sense of relief. I kept looking at him, expecting movement even though I knew there wouldn't be any. That waiting made everything feel more real. When the police arrived, they took control quickly and started asking questions, and I answered as much as I could. After everything ended, I tried to move on, but it didn't work the way I expected because the situation stayed with me. People saw me differently, and that never really changed. Before I accepted it, I focused on the panic because it was easier than looking at my decisions. Over time, I realized the important part wasn't the panic. It was the moment before everything went wrong. That moment changed everything. I swear to God it wasn't on purpose. I didn't mean to do it, but at the same time, I felt like in that moment, I saw a chance to save my secret. A secret that would die with me. The case of Michaela Rylarsdom is a disturbing example of how extreme online fantasies can turn deadly in real life. She was accused of killing a client during a recorded fetish session in which he had paid large sums for dangerous acts involving suffocation. What was meant to be consensual content escalated into a fatal situation, blurring the line between performance and reality.
I used to think the worst part of OnlyFans was creepy messages, but one night, a subscriber sent me something. That proved he wasn't watching my content. He was watching me. My name is Alyssa. I started OnlyFans about a year ago. At first it was just for extra income, nothing extreme, just lifestyle content, chatting, requests. Most subscribers were normal, some weird, but manageable, until one account appeared. Username, Watcher_47. No profile picture, no bio. He didn't ask for anything. He just tipped a lot. $100, $200, sometimes $500 at a time. At first I thought I got lucky, until the messages started. His first message was simple. You should close your curtains at night. I froze. I looked behind me. My curtains were open. I laughed it off. Maybe a guess. Then another message came. Blue looks good on you? I was wearing a blue shirt, not posted, not recorded, just live. That's when my stomach dropped. I replied, Do you know me? He didn't answer. Instead, He sent a photo. It was my apartment building, taken from outside, at night, my window clearly visible. After that, things escalated. He knew when I ordered food, when I turned off lights, even when I wasn't online. Every message felt like he was right outside, watching, waiting. One night, I got a message at exactly 2:13 a.m. "Don't turn around." My heart stopped. I was sitting on my bed, facing the wall. Slowly, I felt it, that feeling, like someone was behind me. I grabbed my phone tighter. Another message. Too late. I turned around, and the front door was slightly open. I was sure I locked it. I stood up slowly, walking toward it. Every step felt wrong. Then suddenly, my phone buzzed again. A photo. It was me, standing, in that exact moment, taken from inside my apartment. Twist ending, 6:10 to 7. I don't remember what happened after that. The police report says I disappeared that night. No forced entry, no struggle, just gone. My phone was found on the floor, still open, still logged in. That account, Watcher_47, it's still active, still tipping, still messaging. Other creators now report receiving the same texts. And the last message sent from my account wasn't written by me. It said, "I found someone new to watch."
Have you ever been to Wendy's? In general, it is a good restaurant. The food is pretty good, and they have more variety than the rest of the burger places. Like McDonald's with Ronald, they also have their own mascot. She is a very cute, red-headed girl. I never knew if she is based on a real person or if they just created her for the logo. But what I do know is that once, someone disguised as she tried to kill me. It all started one normal night. On weekends, I have to babysit my son, and his favorite place to eat is Wendy's. He used to throw a big tantrum when I didn't take him, and over time, it had become our favorite father-son activity. Everything was going well until one day, I noticed something strange. As we left the place, a person disguised as the Wendy's girl greeted us. There was nothing strange about this. What did scare my son was that the whole costume was covered in blood. After we passed her, she walked behind us, still waving at us. My son started to get really scared and started to speed up his pace. I thought about confronting this person, but to tell the truth, I'm a pacifist. I don't know how to fight, and I don't want to. I would if it was to defend my son, but what would that accomplish? I would only put him at risk. I decided to pick up the pace and get into the car as soon as possible. Just a few steps away, the girl was still waving at us in a terrifying manner. Several weeks passed, and my son was somewhat reluctant to return to the restaurant, until one day. I talked to his mother, and she convinced him. I was sure nothing would happen. Maybe that was a one-time thing. If this person was stalking all the customers like that, she had probably already been kicked out. With many doubts, my son went with me to the restaurant. Little by little, I could see how the spark began to return. There was no trace of the strange woman, and he began to feel more and more comfortable. We spent a great night together eating. It seemed like everything that had happened would be in the past as a bad and bizarre memory. We made our way to the car, and the parking lot was empty. But this was a good thing, since our stalker from that time wasn't there either. We got into the car, and I started it up. But at that moment, the thing I was most afraid of happened. In front of the car, preventing us from moving forward, the woman in the costume was waving at us. Her costume was still bloody, and just like last time, looked like fresh blood. Her greetings were much more frenetic than the previous time. This time, she was waving her hand violently. As soon as he saw her, my son began to cry as if he had recalled an event that had kept him awake at night for many nights. I knew it had affected him, but this was much worse than I thought. I honked at her to run, but instead of listening to me, she only came closer, walking in front of the car and even standing on top of it. I quickly put on the seatbelt while I listened as this terrifying woman walked on the roof. I took advantage of the situation to try to speed up the car, but as if sensing that I was going to do it, She laid down and stuck her head inside of the window, showing us a big knife in the process. I accelerated the car. But in a matter of seconds, we lost control and crashed into a pole. All the car's tires were flat. The woman had fallen from the accident, so I took the opportunity to grab my son and run back to the Wendy's. On the way, the woman caught up with me in a matter of seconds and threw me to the ground. My son fell away, and as I yelled at him to go to the restaurant to report what was happening, the woman tried to press her knife against me. She was very strong. Somehow, her strength was equal to mine, which in itself was not much. My arms began to give way, and the knife came closer and closer to my throat until suddenly, it was all over. Some security men threw the woman away from me, and I, terrified, stepped back. I took a deep breath because it was all over. But a battle cry brought me back to reality. The woman was running at full speed, and in one leap, she lunged towards me to plunge her knife into me. The security men caught her in mid-jump, grabbed her knife, and held her until the police arrived. When they took off her mask, my son started crying, and I was shocked. That person was not a Wendy's employee. She was my ex-wife, my son's mother. After a while, she confessed that she was dressing up to scare my son so that he would no longer want to spend time with me or have a bonding activity like she was doing. She had no intention of killing me, but that night, everything went out of control. She had taken drugs that took her out of herself, and because of that, all the subtlety in her plan was gone. She went into a state of euphoria and with a knife already in her hand, tried to kill me and give my son a trauma he would never forget. After that, I kept custody of my son. He still goes to see his mother in prison, but he doesn't want to. I always convince him to do it, to forgive her, but I must tell you the truth. I will never do it. Since that day, every time my son and I go to Wendy's, we are afraid. The food tastes much more bitter, and we are just thinking about leaving. But we keep lying to ourselves that everything we went through didn't affect us. At the end of the day, even though she ended up in jail, my ex-wife, the woman dressed as the little girl at Wendy's, got her way.
Back when I was a teenager, I had a girlfriend named Olivia. Although she was a teenager too, she was in college. 2 years older than me and much more mature. She was the nicest human I'd ever known. We lived in the same neighborhood, played together, went to the same school until she graduated, and had the same group of friends. So it wasn't a surprise to our parents when we both announced that we were dating. She was 19 and I was 17 when we both decided to work at our local Wendy's. It was a small outlet and mostly the college and high school crowd frequented that restaurant. We wanted to buy a car so I could drive the 4 miles out of our town to visit her at community college. We were both very excited about the prospect of having a car and not having to borrow our parents' cars to see one another. Most weekends we worked late in the restaurant and often offered to close the restaurant. This would allow us to spend more time together. Although Olivia was older than me, she was a short, petite girl, whereas I was a 6-foot-tall football player. Also, working late for an hour or so paid us more, which meant we could add more money to our collection to buy a car before the summer break was over. I was very happy to get so much time with Olivia. Little did I know that that's all I was going to get with her. At that young age, we had planned our whole lives together. I was excited to join her in the community college, though I could easily secure a spot in the Ivy League colleges with my sports background. However, I wanted to be with her, so I decided to go to the community college. One evening while we were working in the restaurant as usual, a group of my high school friends came in to have a quick bite. I was quite popular in the college, so they all greeted me and ordered their food. That evening, it was again just me and Olivia in the Wendy's, as our co-workers had some emergency. The kids from my school were enjoying themselves in one of the booths when Olivia and I were getting their orders ready. "Hey there!" Sam had walked up to the counter. "Hey, Sam, anything I could get you other than your order?" "No, Jack. I'm here to tell you guys something. You know my dad is a cop, right? So he received intel from one of the other sheriffs that there's a killer on the loose in our county. and he is targeting shopkeepers, workers, waiters, etc., who are alone in the shops and restaurants at night. You guys work pretty late. Just take care, okay? Olivia was listening too, as Sam warned us. Okay, buddy. Thanks for giving us a heads up. We'll take care. With that, Sam returned to his table where my other friends sat. After my friends left, there were no more customers, so we decided to head home. A week later, Olivia and I realized that we had collected the required amount to purchase the car we both wanted. With the help of my dad, we bought the car and were super happy to drive to and from work every day. It was a black Toyota, nothing fancy, but at least it was a first step towards our future together. I remember we were both so happy. In early July one evening, the other workers had left early to enjoy some movie that had just been released. Although now we didn't need extra money to save up for the car, we still enjoyed working late. So that evening too, we were more than happy to cover up for our colleagues. Our car was parked right in front of the entrance to the door in the parking lot. Olivia was cleaning up the inside counters and I was setting the tables right. That's when we heard the alarm of our car go off. It was so loud that for a second we were confused. No one was in the restaurant except us, and in the past hour or so, we hadn't spotted anyone in the parking lot as well. This happened back when there were no CCTV cameras, so we couldn't even look into the camera feed to see if anyone was there. The alarm was still going off. Someone had to do something to stop the noise. A few minutes later, I saw the most horrid scene of my life. I don't remember why I looked up, but when I did, I saw him there. He was standing with his face pressed against the window of the restaurant, and his eyes were pitch black, without any pupils or anything. His face looked demonic, and he had a silly grin pasted on it. I was terrified just looking at him. But when I realized that Olivia was still cleaning the counters, my fear spiked sky high. She was unaware of this person still busy cleaning the damn counter. The man and I stared through the glass at one another. His smile didn't waver an inch, and his dark matted hair was pasted to his face. His skin was yellow and unnaturally textured. He had a big butcher knife in his hand, which he raised and showed me through the window. I was helpless at that moment. I watched the man run towards Olivia behind the counter as I stood there beside our new car in the parking lot, looking at them from outside. No matter how fast I ran, I was sure he would kill my girlfriend. I was truly, utterly helpless. I sprinted towards the doors, nonetheless, and yanked the front door open. I jumped behind the counter and saw the lifeless body of Olivia, covered in blood, and with knife marks on her neck and torso. She was dead, and the knife was lying beside her. I knelt and held her body in my hand and sobbed. However, one thing I noticed was that the killer was nowhere to be seen. There was no back door to the restaurant and no other exit either, and he surely didn't walk out of the front exit. So, where did he go? I don't remember what happened next, how the cops got there, and for how long I was holding my girlfriend's lifeless, bloody body. The next thing I remember was the detective saying that it was an open and shut case, as I was the killer. They had found my fingerprints on the murder weapon when in fact, I'd never touched it. Also, they didn't find any footprints other than mine and Olivia's behind the counter, which concluded that I was the killer. No matter how much I tried to convince them that I wasn't the murderer and there was a man who did this, no one believed me. Not my parents, not the cops, nor my friends. Now, I stand before the same Wendy's restaurant that I and Olivia worked in, after being out of prison 35 years later. Till this day, I could not find the proof of the black-eyed man who killed my girlfriend and ruined my life. Was it I who really killed her? Or was there another man, or ghost perhaps? What do you guys think?
When I was a little girl, my mother told me that fear was an emotion that required to be conquered. But in case it was impossible to fight against it, the best solution would be to flee. I never seemed to understand what she meant until 3 months ago, when I finally came across a fearsome situation. But before I start telling you my dreadful story, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Mary. When I graduated from high school, I got accepted to a college in another state. I was happy to move out of my family's house, as I did not have any patience to put up with my parents' unending fights. At first, I was really happy. I have never felt that free in my life. However, as years passed, I started to face the consequences of my lack of attention to the classes. They warned me over and over again, and eventually kicked me out of the college due to the classes I kept failing. I never had the courage to tell my parents about it because I was afraid that they would force me to live with them again, and that was something I did not desire. Because I was not able to stay in the dorm, I had to find a place to live, and to be able to pay the rent, I had to work. I searched for a job and was desperate to find one. I searched the internet, hoping to find a suitable job, but I could not find any. After a couple of days, I ended up being a server in Wendy's. It was my first working experience, so I had a hard time to adjust to having a career. A couple of months passed, and I realized the fact that I got used to working there. Of course, I would get tired time to time, and sometimes rude customers would piss me off, but other than that, I was quite happy working in Wendy's. I was not aware that this beautiful first job experience of mine was about to turn into a nightmare. The day that horrible event occurred was 3 months ago. It was a busy day, and we were all exhausted as the time of closing arrived. Me and 2 other coworkers of mine stayed to close the restaurant. One of them was an old man who very rarely spoke to any of us. We did not know anything about him, but he would always gently smile and thank me whenever I helped him. His name was David, and that was actually all the information I had about him. The other one was Liam. He was an extremely thin man in his 30s. He had black bags under his eyes. His skin was dirty and pale. He smelt like a wet dog that had been living inside a trash bin. Even though he was not too wretched looking at him would still give me the creeps. He was a talkative person who enjoyed telling the same stories over and over again. As we were about to close the restaurant, Liam approached me and started to speak, as if I was eager to listen to one of his stories. A great sense of boredom filled my heart. I told him that I forgot to clean the bathrooms and walked away. Of course, it was an excuse to get away from him. I went inside the bathroom and started to wait. The bathroom did not need to be cleaned, as I had already done it a half an hour ago. But unfortunately, with Liam around, the bathroom was the only place I could find some peace. As I waited for 5 minutes, hoping that the others would finish their duties quickly, so that I could go home as fast as I could, I heard footsteps coming towards the bathroom. The sound stopped, and I heard a knocking on the bathroom door. It was Liam. He told me that he was bored and that he wanted to speak with me. With a frustrated voice, I said, "I am busy. Why don't you go and talk with David?" He seemed to not understand or care about my frustration as he replied, "Everybody knows that David is not the chatty type. I tried talking with him, but got bored immediately. Also, I really enjoy having conversations with you." I sensed a sudden shift on his tone as he said the last sentence. His voice became unsettling. I did not respond. He started to talk about his life, but his speech topic quickly changed into a sexual life and how good was his performance in bed. While talking, I could hear his deep breathing sound. Obviously, I was disturbed by his speech, and I told him to leave me alone. With a devilish voice, he said, "I can show you how good I am in bed if you like me to." Once again, I screamed, "Leave me alone." My voice echoed in the bathroom. After a couple of seconds, I started to hear banging sounds, as if he was trying to break open the door. Thankfully, I was smart enough to lock the door, but this insane man was still trying to open the door. I cried for help. I screamed as loud as I could, hoping that David might come to my aid. After a while, Liam managed to break the door. As he stood there right before me, He locked his eyes on my breasts and grinned. He opened his eyes so wide that I thought they were going to pop out of their sockets. Of course, you want me to please you, my love, he said as he started to approach me slowly. At that moment, I heard the breaking sound of glass, and when I looked behind Liam, I saw David with a broken bottle in his shaking old hand. I realized that David had broke the glass bottle on Liam's head. Although blood was pouring from his head, Liam was acting as if nothing happened. He continued to walk towards me. He grabbed hold of me with the skeleton-like hands. His grip was way more powerful than I expected. I wanted to fight back, but my body was totally frozen. David jumped on Liam and tried to pull him away from me. Liam pushed him so hard that he fell to the ground and hit his head on the floor. I felt like my body was paralyzed. I could not move a single muscle. When I thought everything was over, I heard the sound of my mother in my head, telling me to fight back or run away. Following the virtuous advice she gave me when I was a child, I found the strength to snap out of my paralyzed state. I pushed Liam back. He tried to grab me again, but I managed to run away from him. As I ran outside, I heard the police sirens. Seeing the blue and red lights shining as the police car arrived in front of the building, I felt a sense of relief. 2 officers rushed toward me. Still shook by the recent incident, tears burst out of my tired eyes. I cried and told them what happened. While I was telling them the story, one of them looked behind me and shouted, "He is running away!" They started to run, and I watched them chase Liam. I watched them as they disappeared into the darkness of the night. After a moment, I heard gunshots. The policeman came back and told me that they got him. Apparently, the police had to shoot Liam 9 times before he fell to the ground. I told them that David was lying inside, unconscious. They rushed inside and came out of the restaurant carrying David. "He seems to be okay," one of the officers said. They told me that after David heard my screaming, he called the police, and that was the reason they were able to arrive so quickly. I thanked David. I thanked the officers, and I asked them what they knew about Liam. They told me that, considering the way he resisted to the bullets, it was possible that Liam was under the influence of a substance. I resigned from my job at Wendy's the very next day. I called my parents and told them what happened. My father demanded me to return to them immediately. Normally, this would bother me, but after everything I went through, the idea of going back to my parents' house seemed good. I do not know why Liam was acting that way, but according to the police investigation, it is likely that he was a drug addict with an unstable mind. Although I know he is dead, I still wake up at night, seeing him in my nightmares, approaching me and saying, "Of course, you want me to please you."
I am telling this because keeping it inside is worse than saying it out loud. My name is not important, but my son's name was Eddie, and he was 10 years old when this happened. He was curious, stubborn, and always distracted by animals, especially dogs. That day, we went shopping after school to buy shoes and a jacket. Nothing special, just another routine afternoon. The shopping area was busy but normal, with people walking fast and cars stopping and starting near the sidewalks. Eddie stayed close to me at first, walking beside the cart, asking questions I barely answered because I was tired and focused on finishing quickly. I remember checking prices and thinking about dinner, not paying enough attention to anything else. Near the parking lot entrance, Eddie stopped walking. A stray dog was sitting near a trash bin, calm and quiet with dirty fur and soft eyes. The dog looked friendly, but what caught my attention was how he was watching Eddie. The dog stood up slowly and took 2 steps closer, close enough that I could see its eyes clearly. They were too focused, fixed on Eddie without blinking. The dog did not bark, did not move its head, and did not react to the noise around us. Eddie crouched and smiled, already asking if we could take it home. I told him no right away and pulled the cart forward. I said it was not safe and that we did not have time. He followed me slowly, turning around to look at the dog again, and I did not stop to make sure he was still right behind me. As we moved forward, I looked back once. The dog had not followed us, but it had turned its head and was still staring in our direction, completely still as if waiting. Inside the store, everything felt normal for a few minutes. I stood in line, paid for the shoes, and listened to the cashier talk about discounts I did not care about. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it because I wanted to leave. When I turned around to tell Eddie we were done, he was not there. At first, I thought he had stepped a few feet away, maybe to look at toys or displays near the entrance. I called his name in a normal voice and waited. Nothing happened. I walked toward the door and looked outside, expecting to see him standing near the car or the sidewalk. He was nowhere. My breathing started to change as I walked faster, calling his name louder, checking every corner he could have reached. I asked employees if they had seen a boy in a blue hoodie. They all shook their heads. The noise around me grew louder, and my hands started shaking as I realized too much time had passed. At the edge of the park, I saw the narrow alley between two buildings. It led away from the street, dark, even during the afternoon. I did not want to go there, but my body moved before I could stop it. Before stepping into the alley, I stopped and listened, trying to hear anything familiar, but there were no voices and no footsteps coming from inside. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands were wet with sweat as I took a step forward. A few meters in, I saw one of Eddie's sneakers lying on the ground. It was on its side, still tied, not thrown, not crushed. My stomach dropped and my legs felt weak as I picked it up. The shoe was warm, and that detail made my chest tighten because it meant he had been there moments before. From that moment, fear took control. My thoughts became loud and messy, and I could not slow them down. I started calling his name over and over, louder each time, my voice breaking as I moved deeper into the alley without thinking about danger. At the end of the alley, something was moving. At first, my mind tried to force the image into something familiar, and I recognized the same color of the dog, the same shape of the head, and the same bent ear. The dog stood up, taller than any person. Its body twisted and wrong with legs bent backwards and shoulders in a way no dog should. The creature turned toward me and I saw the same eyes I had seen earlier, unchanged, fixed and focused. Its mouth was wider now, its teeth wrong, chewing slowly with blood running down its chin. I froze because my body refused to move, and fear became heavy and sharp, pressing down on me until breathing felt like work. The thing turned toward me, chewing slowly, blood covering its mouth, not rushing, not hiding. Before it moved, my vision blurred and my ears rang as panic took full control. I recognized the fur, the color, and the shape of the head, and that realization hit me harder than fear itself. This was the same dog my son had touched minutes earlier, the same one that had waited quietly near the trash bin. My body reacted late because part of my brain still tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. The creature suddenly rushed forward, faster than I expected, its movements heavy and certain like it already knew I could not stop it. As it closed the distance, I saw its face clearly, stretched and wrong, but with the same fixed eyes that had stared at Eddie in the parking lot. I felt a sharp, tearing pain as its claws ripped into my forearm, pulling skin and flesh apart with force, and the impact sent me crashing hard against the wall. I fell to the ground screaming, pressing my back against the cold surface, watching it pass me instead of finishing the attack. As it moved away, it spat something onto the ground near my feet. It was a small plastic dinosaur, dirty and wet, one I recognized instantly, and that moment broke something inside me because there was no doubt left about what it had done. My body shook uncontrollably as blood soaked through my sleeve and my arm burned and throbbed with every heartbeat. I tried to stand and failed, my legs refusing to support my weight. I dragged myself forward using one arm, crying loudly, calling Eddie's name again and again, even though I already knew there would be no answer. The creature ran toward the street, dropping to all fours as it moved, its steps louder and heavy, moving exactly like the animal it had pretended to be before. I heard distant screams and sudden car horns as it disappeared, leaving me bleeding and broken in the alley, unable to follow and unable to look away from what it had left behind. Before the ambulance arrived, I sat on the curb shaking violently, unable to stop crying or focus on the voices around me. My arm was wrapped in cloth, but blood kept seeping through, and every movement sent pain through my body. The police asked questions while the medics worked, speaking quickly and calmly as if this was normal. I tried to explain what I saw, struggling to find words, my voice weak and uneven. When I described the creature, their expressions changed, and they stopped writing. They searched the alley and found blood. Too much to explain, but they did not find Eddie. The word missing followed every report, every call, every update. No one said dead, but no one said alive either. Days turned into weeks filled with interviews, searches, and posters. I replayed every second in my head, blaming myself for looking away, for saying no to the dog without holding his hand, for not noticing sooner that he was gone. At night, my arm ached, and the scar pulled and burned for no reason. Sleep became short and shallow, filled with images I could not escape. Eddie was declared missing, not dead, and that word follows me everywhere I go. I moved away and changed everything I could, but nothing feels safe anymore. I avoid dogs. I can't look at their eyes, and I watch children closely, even when they are not mine.
Carol and I wanted to go on a weekend getaway, somewhere quiet. We were driving on a rural highway late at night. I was tired, but I didn't say it out loud. Carol had been looking forward to this trip for months, and I didn't want to ruin it before it even started. The road was narrow with no lights, no houses, and no signs for miles. Just asphalt, fields, and darkness. The engine noise was steady, but every bump made me grip the wheel harder. Carol leaned back in her seat, scrolling through photos she had saved for the trip, talking about places we'd stop at. I answered when I had to, but my attention stayed on the road. We hadn't seen another car in a long time. That alone made me uneasy, even if I didn't fully admit it to myself. There's something about being completely alone on a road that makes every decision feel heavier. Stopping, speeding up, even changing lanes feels like it matters more than usual. And that's when the headlights caught a small figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was an animal. My foot eased off the gas without me thinking about it. As we got closer, the shape didn't move away. It stood upright, too still, right at the edge of the asphalt. Carol leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. It was a child. A boy, alone, barefoot, wearing clothes that didn't match the cold air. He didn't wave or step back. He just watched the car approach, his arms hanging straight down like he was waiting for something to happen. Before stopping, there was a long second where neither of us spoke. I felt my chest tighten and my hands started to sweat on the steering wheel. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but I ignored it because the alternative felt worse. I pulled over. The boy climbed into the back seat without hesitation. He didn't ask if it was okay. He didn't say thank you. He sat straight, his hands on his knees, his eyes fixed forward. When he spoke, his voice was flat and slow, like he was repeating words he had learned recently. He said his mom was coming. The silence after that felt wrong. Not quiet in a peaceful way, but heavy, like we were all holding our breath. I checked the mirror again and again. The boy's eyes never left me. He didn't blink. Not once. My skin started to crawl, and I felt my heart picking up speed. Carol tried to talk to him, asking him where he came from and where his mom was. His answers were short and off. He didn't explain anything. He didn't react the way kids usually do. No fear, no confusion, no emotion at all. Just words, spaced out, carefully placed. Before anything happened, There was a stretch of road that felt endless. The darkness ahead seemed thicker, even though nothing had changed. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to breathe again. My hands were shaking now, and I tightened my grip on the wheel to hide it. The boy finally said his mom was close. He said she was running. I asked how she could keep up with the car. He didn't answer. Carol turned to look at him, and that's when he smiled. His eyes blinked, one at a time. His breathing became shallow without me noticing. His shoulders were tight, almost locked in place, and my jaw hurt from watching him clench his. I kept adjusting my grip on the wheel because my palms were slick with sweat. Every few seconds I checked the mirrors again, even though nothing new appeared. Carol noticed my tension and asked if I was okay, but my voice came out stiff when I answered. I didn't feel okay, and my body reacted faster than my thoughts could keep up. My stomach dropped hard, and fear hit me all at once. Not panic, not screaming fear, but the kind that makes your body go cold. I looked back at the road, and my foot pressed down on the gas without me deciding to do it. In the headlights, something appeared behind us, low to the ground, fast, moving in a way that made no sense. It ran on all fours, but its body didn't move like an animal. Its head stayed level, locked on the car, while the rest of it stretched and contracted with each step. Before the impact, everything sharpened. The sound of the engine, Carol breathing fast, my own pulse pounding in my ears. I could feel how weak we were inside that car, how thin the doors suddenly felt. The thing opened its mouth as it ran. I saw teeth meant to tear, not chew. The boy in the back seat let out a short laugh, and his body started to change. His limbs bent wrong, his shape shifted, skin pulling tight over moving bone. I swerved, too late. As the creature closed the distance, my vision narrowed. I couldn't focus on anything except the shape behind us and the road directly ahead. My arms felt weak, like they might stop responding at any moment, and I had to force them to keep steering straight. My foot pressed harder on the gas, my leg trembling from the effort. Carol grabbed the handle above the door, her knuckles turning white, her breathing fast and uneven. The car left the road and crashed hard into the ditch. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and my head slammed forward. When I came back to myself, everything hurt, and the world felt tilted. Carol was screaming my name, and that sound snapped me into motion. Before I could reach her, weight slammed into the hood. The windshield cracked under the pressure, spreading lines across the glass. The creature's face pressed close, its features twisted, stretched into something almost human, but not enough to be mistaken. It ripped the passenger door open and grabbed Carol. She fought, kicking and clawing, her fear loud and real. I tried to move faster, but my leg wouldn't work right. I dragged myself across the seat, useless, watching every second pass. The creature pulled her out onto the road. I heard her head hit the asphalt. I screamed until my throat burned. Then headlights flooded everything, and a pickup truck hit the creature at full speed. Bone broke. The impact threw it into the trees. At the edge of the forest, the boy stood watching, his face twisted in panic before he ran into the dark. Pain shot through my leg when I tried to stand, sharp and immediate, making me gasp out loud. My hands slipped on the seat fabric as I dragged myself forward, every movement slow and clumsy. I could feel my heart slamming against my ribs, hard enough to hurt. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy, and I couldn't form words fast enough to call Carol's name again as she was pulled farther away from me. People arrived quickly after that. Sirens, voices, hands pulling me away from the wreck. Carol was alive, barely, her body torn and bleeding. I couldn't stop shaking, even when they wrapped a blanket around me. They asked questions. I answered some of them, not all. The story became an animal attack, Everyone agreed on that because it was easier. The driver swore he hit a deer. No one argued. No one searched the forest for long. No body was found. No explanation was needed. I knew better, but I stayed quiet. Carol survived, but parts of that night are gone from her memory. Doctors say trauma does that. I don't correct them. It's better this way. I don't drive on rural highways anymore. I avoid empty roads. I avoid places where help is far away. I stay where people are, even if I don't talk to them.
My friends Leon and Sean and I wanted to go to the woods for a few days to clear our minds and have new adventures. We went to a much more remote forest about which there are several urban legends, but that's the case with almost all forests, and we didn't believe in those things. The road to the camping area was narrow and poorly marked. There were no other cars, no cabins, no signs of recent activity. Our phones lost signal long before we arrived. I noticed it and felt uneasy, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the one who complained over nothing. We set up camp quickly. 2 tents, the fire pit, a small table. The forest around us looked normal, but it felt empty. No animals, no distant movement. I told myself it was just a quiet place. As night fell, we sat near the fire and talked about random things. Work, old stories, plans that didn't matter. I kept glancing at the trees without realizing it. I wasn't scared yet, but I wasn't comfortable either. When the fire started to fade, Sean asked who wanted to get more wood. Leon stood up immediately and grabbed the flashlight. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even look back at us. He just walked toward the trees and disappeared into the dark. At first I wasn't worried. A few minutes passed, then more. I called his name once, then again. There was no answer. Sean joked that Leon was probably trying to scare us. I didn't laugh. We walked closer to the trees, calling out louder. The flashlight beam from Leon was gone. The forest stayed silent. That silence began to feel heavy, like it was pressing down on us. We waited longer than we should have. When we finally heard something, it wasn't a voice calling back. It was a low, broken sound, uneven and strained, coming from deeper in the woods. We followed the sound together, moving slowly. My hands were shaking and my chest felt tight. I kept thinking that whatever we were about to find wasn't going to be simple or easy. We found Leon on the ground near a fallen tree. The moment I saw him, panic hit me hard. His clothes were torn. His skin was scraped and dirty. His face looked swollen, wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. He was alive, but barely responsive. Sean dropped beside him, calling his name over and over. Leon tried to speak, but the words came out slow and broken. His breathing was uneven, and his eyes wouldn't focus properly. I felt sick just looking at him. Getting him back to camp was difficult. He leaned heavily on us, barely able to stand. Every step made him let out weak sounds of pain. My heart was racing and I kept turning around, afraid something would come out of the trees behind us. Before anything else happened, there was a stretch of time where everything felt frozen. Leon sat on the ground, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. The fire crackled weakly. The forest stayed quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. A noise came from behind the camp, slow and uneven, like someone moving carefully. Fear hit me instantly, sharp enough to make my stomach drop. I looked at Sean, then at the injured Leon on the ground. Leaving them felt wrong, but staying felt worse. I told Sean not to move and stepped toward the sound. I walked into the trees with the flashlight shaking in my hand. My breathing was loud, rushed, and completely out of control. Every few steps I stopped, listening, forcing myself forward even though my legs felt weak. Then someone stepped into the light. It was Leon, clean, unharmed, standing upright, my mind locked up, unable to process what I was seeing. Relief and confusion crashed together so hard it made me dizzy. He spoke fast, explaining that he had gotten lost, that something chased him deep into the woods, something that didn't move right. He said he hid, ran, and kept moving until he was sure it was gone. His voice shook, and this time it sounded real. I told him we already found him and that he was hurt back at camp. Leon's face changed immediately. Fear replaced confusion. He grabbed my arm and told me that wasn't possible. He said the thing following him could copy voices and shapes. His grip was weak, his hand trembling badly. He tried to move faster, but his legs gave out. He stumbled, breathing hard, barely able to stay standing. I didn't stop. I pulled my arm free and ran. Sean screamed. I ran alone, branches hitting my face and arms as I pushed through the trees. Leon shouted my name behind me, his voice breaking, telling me to stop, telling me not to go back. He couldn't keep up. The scream from the camp drowned everything else. When I reached the firelight, the scene was already destroyed. The blanket lay empty on the ground. Sean was on his knees, dragging himself backward in the dirt. The thing that had been sitting with us wore Leon's face, but its body moved wrong now. Joints bending too far, head tilted unnaturally. Sean tried to scream again, but the sound cut off when the creature grabbed him by the throat. I shouted without thinking, throwing a rock that hit its shoulder and did nothing. It turned its head toward me slowly, eyes calm and focused. There was a brief pause where everything felt unbearably clear. Sean's legs kicked weakly. The creature's skin shifted, struggling to stay in shape. Then it released him and charged toward me. I stumbled and fell hard, knocking the air out of my lungs. It was on me immediately, heavy and cold, pressing me into the ground. Its face was inches from mine, skin stretched tight, mouth opening wider than it should. I hit the ground hard, the air leaving my lungs in dry gasps. The creature was on me immediately, its weight crushing my chest, pinning my arms uselessly against the dirt. I couldn't push it away. I couldn't reach for anything. My hands slipped on the ground as I tried to move, panic flooding my body so fast I couldn't think. Its face was inches from mine, wearing Leon's features stretched too tight, eyes fixed on me without emotion. Its mouth opened wider than it should have, and a wet, uneven sound came from deep inside its throat. I kicked blindly, my heel scraping against its leg, doing nothing to slow it down. I knew with absolute clarity that I was not strong enough to stop it. A sound behind it pulled its attention away. The real Leon screamed my name from the edge of the trees. The creature froze for a second, then slowly lifted its weight off me. I didn't wait to understand why. I rolled onto my side and crawled away, my body shaking so badly I could barely move. The creature turned away from me and grabbed Sean's body, dragging him across the ground toward the trees. It didn't rush, it didn't struggle. It took her like it had already decided this is how it would end. I forced myself up and ran, grabbing Leon as he stumbled toward me. We reached the car without looking back. The engine started after a short delay that felt endless. As I drove, I saw movement between the trees and the mirror, slow and steady, watching us leave. Sean was never found. The official report said he got lost. No one searched long enough to find anything else. Leon survived, but he is not the same. He panics when someone calls his name from behind. Once he told me he heard his own voice calling to him while he was hiding. I think about how calmly it sat with us, how patient it was. Whatever took Sean learned enough, and it knows how to wait. I'm sure it will attack again, but not me.
Go